The whip split Boron's back again, and she bit her lip hard to avoid screaming, tasting blood as Kazan struck her repeatedly, his face contorted in a jealous rage. Philip Morris felt his chest burn with fury as he watched, fighting every instinct to snatch the electro-lash from the alien slaver's claws and turn it on him instead. But the human knew he had to control himself. Millions of lives depended on the trade deal with these cruel Rakari tyrants going through. He couldn't risk an incident over one slave girl, no matter how much it killed him inside. Philip hadn't expected any of this when he first arrived on Rakar Prime to negotiate the agreement. As an experienced space trader, he was used to dealing with all sorts of aliens and cultures across the galaxy. But nothing prepared him for the sheer brutality of the Rakari's treatment of the other species they had subjugated and enslaved. Everywhere he looked, miserable slaves in chains toiled away, starving and downtrodden under the whips and abuse of their arrogant masters. The worst shock came when Philip first laid eyes on Boron and felt an instant connection, a shared humanity despite her alien features. He quickly learned she was the personal slave of none other than Kazan, the Rakari trade minister himself. Unable to ignore the horrific injustice, Philip found himself taking insane risks, secretly meeting with Boron to learn about her people's proud history before the Rakari crushed them. As Philip sat across the negotiating table from Kazan and the other Rakari leaders, their thinly veiled threats and posturing made it all too clear what kind of dishonorable brutes they were. The stakes kept raising. Now it wasn't just critical food shipments on the line that could save countless human colonies from starvation. If Philip didn't play this exactly right, it could mean an all-out war with this increasingly hostile slaver empire. Kazan's cruel eyes narrowed with suspicion, and he stormed out, headed straight for Boron's quarters. Philip's heart raced as he followed, dreading what he would find. He arrived to the gut-wrenching scene of Kazan viciously beating Boron, accusing her of conspiring with the human. Philip clenched his fists, wanting nothing more than to intervene. But he knew if he so much as touched the trade minister, it would mean war and the loss of the vital trade deal. The pressure weighed on Philip like a neutron star as the clock kept ticking. He had to make an impossible choice, and he had to make it now. Save Boron from this nightmarish life as Kazan's abused slave and risk dooming millions, or abandon this poor, tortured soul who he'd grown to deeply care for, securing the trade agreement, but knowing she would suffer in bondage forever. With the fate of worlds hanging in the balance, Philip Morris faced the most intensely difficult decision of his life. With the fate of worlds hanging in the balance, Philip Morris faced the most intensely difficult decision of his life. He closed his eyes for a moment, his mind racing through every possible scenario, and then it hit him. A desperate, risky plan that just might allow him to save Boron and secure the trade deal. But he would need help to pull it off. Philip slipped out of the trade negotiations, feigning a bout of human illness. Instead of returning to his quarters, he took a winding route through the Citadel's lower levels, evading the ever-present surveillance. He had quietly made contact with Zarek, the leader of a ragtag Rakari rebel group that operated in the shadows. Now it was time to meet the man himself. In a dimly lit back room, Philip came face to face with Zarek. The rebel cut an imposing figure, his battle-scarred face etched with hard lines. "You're either very brave or very foolish, human," Zarek growled. "What do you want?" Philip laid out his audacious proposal. He would use his contacts to smuggle weapons to arm Zarek's rebels. In return, he needed their help to get Boron off Rakar Prime and expose the crimes of the Rakari leadership. Zarek studied him for a long moment before breaking into a fierce grin. "You've got guts, Morris. Maybe we can help each other after all." Over the next several days, Philip worked feverishly to set his plan in motion. While keeping up appearances at the trade negotiations, he used his network to quietly funnel arms to the rebels. Late at night, he sliced into the Rakari security network, his fingers flying over the console, as he created false identities and clearance codes that would allow him to smuggle Boron out. The day of the trade deal signing ceremony arrived, and a sense of tension hung over the Citadel. Philip's heart pounded as he slipped away from the proceedings, every step taking him closer to a confrontation he knew would change everything. He met Boron at their pre-arranged spot, pressing a code cylinder into her shaking hand. "This will get you through the checkpoints. Stay close and be ready to run." Together they approached the security cordon, trying to look as innocuous as possible amidst the crowds. Philip flashed his diplomatic credentials, while Boron presented her falsified papers with an air of meek subservience. The Rakari guard frowned as he scanned the code cylinder, and Philip's blood turned to ice in his veins. Just then, a thunderous boom shook the citadel, followed by a staccato burst of explosions. Alarms blared as Rakari guards scrambled to respond, and Philip seized his chance. He drove his elbow into the guard's throat and wrenched the plasma rifle from his claws, shoving Boron ahead of him. "Go, go, go!" he shouted. All around them, Zarek's rebels sprang into action, emerging from hidden alcoves and maintenance hatches to unleash a hail of fire on the guards. Boron sprinted through the chaos, her breath coming in ragged gasps as Philip urged her forward. Plasma bolts sizzled past them, the air ionized and thick with smoke. Philip shouldered the rifle and snapped off a few shots behind them, covering their escape. They burst onto the landing pad, Philip's ship waiting with engines already spooling to full power. Rakari warships were descending on the pad, their hulls filled with cannon batteries. Philip shoved Boron up the boarding ramp, plasma searing the decking near his feet. He dove inside, pounding his fist on the ramp controls. "Punch it!" he screamed to his pilot. The ship leaped skyward, the inertial compensators straining against the sudden acceleration. Boron collapsed into a seat, her whole body shaking as Philip kneeled beside her. "You're safe now," he promised, squeezing her hand. But their escape was cut short as a massive Rakari cruiser swung into their path, weapon ports glowing with deadly charge. "Attention unidentified vessel," a harsh voice barked over the comm. "Heave to and prepare to be boarded, or you will be destroyed." Philip locked eyes with Boron before striding to the cockpit, his eyebrows furrowed. He triggered the comm, the Rakari commander's furious face filling the display. "I wouldn't do that if I were you," Philip said, steel in his voice. He held up a data chip between his fingers. "I have recordings of everything your leaders said at the trade negotiations, every deception, every crime. If you fire on us, I'll broadcast this across the galaxy, and your precious alliances will crumble." The commander stared at him for a long moment, his scales rippling with barely suppressed rage. Then he snarled out a single word, "Go!" The comm screen went black as the cruiser peeled away, leaving a path open for Philip's ship to slip past. As they hurtled away from Rakar Prime, Boron huddled in her seat, tears streaming down her face. Philip sat beside her, putting a gentle arm around her shoulders. "I'm so sorry," he whispered. "I couldn't leave you in that monster's claws for a second longer." Boron looked up at him, her eyes haunted but filled with a glimmer of hope. "You saved me," she breathed, "but my people, there's so many still enslaved." Philip's face hardened with purpose. "We'll find a way to free them, Boron, no matter how long it takes. Zarek's rebels just showed the cracks in the Rakari's grip on power. This is only the beginning." The ship shuddered as it dropped out of hyperspace, the pursuing Rakari warships hot on their tail. Philip gripped the arms of his chair, squeezing hard. "We can't outrun them forever," he said grimly. "We don't need to," Boron replied, her eyes scanning the nav display. "There, Zephyria 6, it's a haven for outlaws and smugglers. The Rakari won't dare follow us there." Philip nodded and punched in the coordinates. The ship banked hard, diving towards the dusty brown orb below. Plasma bolts from the Rakari ships sizzled past, rocking their small craft. They plunged into the planet's atmosphere, the hull glowing red-hot. Philip's teeth rattled as he fought to keep control. With a bone-jarring thud, they touched down on the outskirts of a ramshackle spaceport. "Let's move," Philip said, grabbing his pack. "Won't be long before the Rakari send ground forces after us." They hurried through crowded streets, aliens of all species eyeing them suspiciously. Philip led them to a run-down cantina he'd heard whispers about in his trading days. Inside, the air was thick with smoke, and the stench of alien liquor. A grizzled human veteran sat alone at the bar nursing a drink. His cybernetic eye whirred as it focused on Philip and Boron. "You look like you could use some help," he said gruffly. "We're looking for someone who hates the Rakari as much as we do," Philip replied cautiously. The man's scarred face broke into a fierce grin. "Name's Jax Rogan, and brother, you've come to the right place." Over the next hour, Jax introduced them to his crew. Gron, a hulking Zephyrian with arms like tree trunks, Wiz, a wiry human whose fingers danced across hollow displays, and Ghost, a silent figure whose species was impossible to determine beneath a shroud of adaptive camouflage. When Boron mentioned her father imprisoned by the Rakari, Jax leaned forward, suddenly intense. "A jailbreak, huh? Now that sounds like fun." They spent days planning the infiltration. Wiz created flawless false identities, while Ghost scouted the prison's defenses. When the day finally came, Philip's heart raced as they approached the forbidding structure. Ghost's rifle cracked twice, and 2 perimeter guards dropped silently. They slipped inside, Wiz's hacked security codes granting them access. For a moment it seemed too easy. Alarms blared as a squad of Rakari guards rounded the corner. Philip and Jax moved in perfect sync, years of combat experience kicking in. Plasma bolts flew as they dove for cover. To Philip's surprise, Boron held her own, her slight frame belying incredible strength and agility. She ducked under a guard's wild swing and drove her knee into its midsection, following up with a vicious elbow strike that dropped it to the floor. They fought their way deeper into the prison, leaving a trail of unconscious guards in their wake. Finally, they reached the high security block. Gron grabbed the reinforced door and with a grunt of effort tore it from its frame. Inside they found a gaunt figure slumped against the wall. Boron gasped. "Father!" The older alien's eyes widened in disbelief. "Boron, how—" They half-carried Zoran back the way they'd come, but more alarms were sounding. The extraction point was swarming with Rakari troops, and gunships hovered menacingly overhead. Plasma fire rained down, forcing them to take cover behind a low wall. Philip fired back, his shots barely scratching the gunship's armor. Just as hope began to fade, their ship shimmered into view, Wiz at the controls. "Sorry I'm late," his voice crackled over the comms. "Cloaking tech's a bit finicky." They made a mad dash for the boarding ramp, Philip and Gron laying down covering fire. As they lifted off, a stray bolt caught Boron in the side. She cried out, stumbling. "Boron!" Philip shouted, catching her before she fell. Blood seeped between his fingers as he tried to staunch the wound. Stars blurred into streaks as they leapt to hyperspace. For a moment there was silence, broken only by Boron's labored breathing. "She needs help," Philip said, his voice tight with worry. "Is there anywhere we can go?" Zoran spoke up, his voice weak but determined. "There's a hidden rebel base on the 3rd moon of Kaldor. They have advanced medical facilities." Philip nodded grimly, holding Boron's hand as her eyes fluttered. He looked down at her pale face, a lump forming in his throat. In that moment, he realized just how much she'd come to mean to him. "Hold on," he whispered fiercely. "Just hold on. We're going to make it through this, and then we're going to bring the whole damn Rakari Empire crashing down." The ship hurtled through hyperspace, racing against time to save Boron's life. But this was just the beginning. The real war was about to begin. The Maverick shuddered as it punched through Alaris 3's turbulent atmosphere. Philip gripped the controls, fighting to keep the ship steady as volcanic ash pelted the view screen. Boron slumped in the co-pilot's seat, her breath shallow and ragged. "Hang on," Philip urged, scanning for the rebel base's coordinates. "We're almost there." A jagged mountain range loomed ahead, its peaks shrouded in swirling dust. As they drew closer, a hidden hangar bay shimmered into view, its cloaking field flickering. Philip eased the Maverick inside, touching down with a gentle thud. The moment the engines powered down, rebel medics swarmed the ship. They whisked Boron away on a hover gurney, her skin pale and clammy. Philip raced after them, his heart pounding. "Stay with me," he pleaded. clutching Boron's hand as they rushed through winding corridors. The medical bay was cramped and dimly lit, but the doctors moved with practiced efficiency. "Plasma burns," one muttered, examining Boron's wound. "We need to stabilize her now." Philip reluctantly stepped back, watching helplessly as they worked to save her life. Hours crawled by, each beep of the medical equipment a torturous reminder of how precarious her condition remained. Meanwhile, Jax and the others were led to a makeshift war room. Grizzled rebels crowded around holomaps, their faces etched with years of hardship. Zoran embraced several of them, tears in his eyes. "My friends," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "I never thought I'd see you again." A scarred Zephyrian clasped Zoran's shoulder. "When we heard about the prison break, we couldn't believe it. You've given us all hope." Jax cleared his throat. "Glad we could help, but from what I've seen, you folks are in one hell of a fight." The rebel commander nodded grimly. "The Rakari have crushed countless worlds, strip-mining resources and enslaving populations. We've been outgunned from the start." Wes pulled out a data crystal. "Maybe this will help even the odds. It's everything we recorded during the trade negotiations, proof of the Rakari's crimes." The rebels crowded around a holoprojector, watching intently as the evidence of the Rakari's brutality played out before them, faces hardened with anger and purpose. "This changes everything," the commander said. "If we can broadcast this across the sector, it could spark a full-scale uprising." Zoran stepped forward. "There may be an even greater weapon within our grasp, an artifact of immense power, hidden away for millennia." He activated another holomap, showing a sprawling star chart. "Our intelligence suggests it's located somewhere in the outer rim. With a ship like the Maverick, we might actually have a chance of finding it before the Rakari do." Jax exchanged glances with his crew, then nodded. "Count us in. Those bastards need to pay." Back in the medical bay, Boron's eyes fluttered open. Philip leaned close, relief washing over him. "Hey there," he said softly. "You had me worried." Boron managed a weak smile. "It'll take more than that to keep me down." Her expression grew somber. "Philip, there's something you need to know about my people." Over the next hour, she recounted the tragic history of her homeworld, the Rakari invasion, the systematic enslavement of her species, the brutal executions of those who resisted, including her own parents. "I was just a child," she whispered, her voice breaking, "but I swore I'd never stop fighting." Philip took her hand, his face hardened with fierce perseverance. "We're going to end this, Boron, I promise you. We'll free your people no matter what it takes." Their eyes met, an unspoken connection deepening between them. In that moment, Philip knew he'd go to the ends of the galaxy for her. Days passed as Boron recovered, and the crew prepared for their mission. Rebel technicians swarmed over the Maverick, upgrading its systems. Philip pored over star charts with Zoran, plotting their course into uncharted space. Finally, the day of departure arrived. The hangar bay was packed with resistance fighters, all there to see them off. Zoran addressed the assembled crowd, his voice ringing out. Her chorus of cheers erupted as the Maverick's engines roared to life. Philip took his place at the helm, Boron beside him. Jax and the others manned their stations, faces set with grit. The ship rocketed out of the hangar, climbing through Alaris 3's turbulent skies. As they broke free of the atmosphere, the vast expanse of space stretched out before them. Philip punched in the coordinates for their first hyperspace jump. He glanced at Boron, seeing his own mix of excitement and apprehension mirrored in her eyes. Whatever lay ahead, they would face it together. "All right, everyone," Philip said, his hand hovering over the hyperdrive controls. "Let's go make history." The stars blurred into streaks of light as the Maverick leapt into the unknown, carrying with it the hopes of countless oppressed worlds. Their quest for the artifact, and the hope of the universe, had begun. The Maverick's hull groaned as it plunged deeper into uncharted space. Philip's fingers danced across the navigation console, inputting coordinates for a remote sector whispered about in hushed tones by the rebel forces. Beside him, Boron's eyes scanned the star charts, searching for any sign of the rumored artifact. "We're entering the Crimson Nebula," Wiz called out from the pilot's seat. "Radiation levels are spiking." The view screen erupted in a dazzling display of swirling crimson gases. Brilliant flashes of energy crackled through the cosmic storm, battering the ship's shields. The Maverick bucked and shuddered as Wiz fought to maintain control. "Gron, divert power to the forward deflectors," Jax barked. The hulking Zephyrian complied, his massive hands working the engineering station. The ship's vibrations lessened, but the danger was not nearly finished. A massive gravitational eddy caught the Maverick, threatening to tear it apart. Wiz's fingers flew across the controls, his face a mask of concentration. The ship corkscrewed through the maelstrom, narrowly avoiding collisions with chunks of cosmic debris. A violent shudder rocked the ship. Warning klaxons blared as a console erupted in a shower of sparks. Philip scanned the nearby systems, searching for any safe harbor. "There, rogue planetoid half a parsec to port, it's our only shot." Wiz angled the failing ship toward the desolate rock. They plummeted through its thin atmosphere, the Maverick's hull glowing red-hot from the friction. With a bone-jarring impact, they skidded across the planetoid's barren surface, coming to rest in a cloud of volcanic ash. A chorus of affirmatives answered him. They gathered in the ship's hold, assessing the damage. "Main engines are fried," Gron reported. "We'll need to cannibalize parts just to get auxiliary power online." "Let's get to work," Jax said. "The sooner we're airborne, the better I'll feel." They had barely begun repairs when a blood-curdling screech split the air. Philip whirled to see a nightmarish creature scuttling toward them. Its insectoid body bristled with razor-sharp blades, and caustic drool dripped from its mandibles. "Hirkan!" Boron shouted in terror. "We need to—" Her words were cut off as more of the creatures swarmed from the shadows. Jax opened fire with his pulse rifle, the plasma bolt searing through chitinous armor. Gron roared a battle cry, swinging a piece of hull plating like a club. Ghosts seemed to melt into the shadows, reappearing to strike with lethal precision. Philip grabbed Boron's arm, pulling her behind a stack of crates. "Stay down," he ordered, drawing his sidearm. He popped up, squeezing off shots at the advancing horde. Wiz worked frantically at a control panel, trying to restore power to the ship's defenses. "Almost there," he shouted over the din of battle. A Hirkan leapt onto the crates, its bladed limbs slashing at Philip. He ducked, feeling the wind of the strike ruffle his hair. Boron snatched up a length of pipe, swinging it with all her might. The improvised weapon connected with a satisfying crunch, sending the creature tumbling. "Philip!" Zoran's voice crackled over the comm. "We're activating the failsafe. Get clear." Philip's eyes widened in horror. "No, there has to be another way." "That's the only chance you have," Zoran replied, his voice filled with grim drive. "May your quest bring justice to the galaxy." "Everyone inside now," Philip shouted. They scrambled into the ship's interior as a blinding flash erupted from the cargo hold. The implosion device detonated, creating a localized singularity that devoured the Hirkans and the brave rebel soldiers who had activated it. In the aftermath, they stood in stunned silence. The Maverick, their home and lifeline, lay in ruins around them. "What now?" Ghost asked, his normally stoic voice tinged with uncertainty. Philip squared his shoulders. "We press on. There has to be something on this rock that can help us." They gathered what supplies they could salvage and set out across the planetoid's hellish landscape. Plumes of noxious gas erupted from fissures in the ground. The horizon was a jagged mess of volcanic peaks and ash-choked valleys. After hours of grueling travel, they crested a rise and saw it, a massive structure of alien design half buried in the planetoid's surface. Its angles defied Euclidean geometry, hinting at the vast gulf of time separating its creators from humanity. They made their way inside, Wiz's portable scanner probing the ancient data nodes they discovered. His eyes lit up as he decrypted the information. "I've got coordinates," he exclaimed. "A system far beyond the galactic rim. If the artifact exists, that's where we'll find it." Before they could celebrate, The ground beneath their feet began to tremble. Cracks spider-webbed across the alien structure's walls. "Run!" Philip shouted. They sprinted for the exit as the ruin collapsed around them. Outside, the planetoid itself seemed to be tearing itself apart. Rivers of magma burst from the ground, and the very air ignited with superheated plasma. "The auxiliary craft," Jax yelled, pointing to where the small ship lay half buried in ash. They piled in, Wiz's fingers flying across the controls. The craft lurched into the air as the ground where it had rested moments before erupted in a geyser of molten rock. They watched in awe and terror as the planetoid was consumed by fire, their narrow escape finally sinking in. In the cramped confines of the auxiliary craft, Philip pulled Boron close. "We're still here," he said softly, "still fighting." The moment passed, and they turned their attention to the challenge ahead. Wiz inputted the coordinates from the alien data node, plotting a course into the darkest reaches of unexplored space. "I'm picking up encrypted Rakari transmissions," Ghost reported. "Hunter-killer squads, they're on our trail." Philip's fists tight. He looked around at his battered but unbroken crew. "Let them come," he said. "We've got a galaxy to save." The auxiliary craft's engines flared to life, propelling them into the void. Philip took Boron's hand, drawing strength from her presence. Whatever trials lay ahead, they would face them as one. The auxiliary craft shuddered as it dropped out of hyperspace. Philip's eyes widened at the sight before them. A vast nebula swirled with ethereal colors, concealing a star system at its heart. "We've got something," Wiz called out, hunched over his console. "Gravitational readings are off the charts. It matches the coordinates from those ancient charts." Philip leaned forward, studying the sensors. "This has to be it, the artifact." "Battle stations!" Philip barked, sliding into the pilot's seat. The sleek forms of Rakari fighters emerged from the nebula's swirling gases. Energy weapons lanced out, peppering the Maverick's shields. Philip's hands danced across the controls, sending the ship into a wild corkscrew. Jax and Gron manned the weapons stations, unleashing volleys of return fire. Boron sprinted to a nearby turret, strapping herself in. Her face set in concentration as she took aim. A Rakari fighter crossed her sights, and she squeezed the trigger. The enemy craft erupted in a satisfying fireball. "Nice shot," Philip called out, barrel rolling to avoid another barrage. Wiz's fingers flew across his station. "Launching decoy drones, now!" A swarm of small, nimble craft burst from the Maverick's launch tubes. They zipped between the Rakari ships, jamming sensors and drawing fire. "Push through!" Philip shouted, angling the ship towards a gap in the enemy formation. They plunged into the nebula, leaving chaos in their wake. But their respite was short-lived. The gases around them began to churn and spark. "Antimatter storm's dead ahead," Wiz yelled. "Our shields won't last long in that." Philip gritted his teeth, wrestling with the controls as the ship bucked and heaved. Arcs of energy crackled across the view screen, battering the Maverick's defenses. "Shields at 30%, Ghost reported. "We can't take much more of this." Just as they thought they'd cleared the worst of it, a massive shockwave slammed into the ship. Consoles exploded in showers of sparks. The deck lurched violently beneath their feet. "We've lost main power," Wiz shouted over the cacophony of alarms. "Controls are gone." Philip stared in horror as a volcanic hellscape of a planet filled the view screen. They plummeted towards its surface, trailing fire and debris. "Brace for impact," he yelled. The Maverick slammed into the ground with bone-jarring force. It skidded across the landscape, carving a deep furrow through volcanic rock. When they finally ground to a halt, silence fell. Philip pulled himself to his feet, his head spinning. "Sound off, is everyone okay?" Fair chorus of pained groans answered him. They stumbled out of the smoking wreck, taking stock of their situation. The Maverick lay in ruins, surrounded by a hellish landscape of ash and lava flows. Wiz activated a handheld scanner, its screen flickering to life. "I'm picking up energy readings," he said. "It has to be the artifact, but it's miles from here, in some kind of structure built into that caldera." Philip surveyed the treacherous terrain before them. Looks like we're going on foot. Grab whatever supplies you can salvage. We move out in 5 minutes. They set off across the volcanic wasteland, every step a struggle. Toxic fumes billowed from cracks in the ground. The heat was oppressive, sapping their strength. Jax took point, his sharp eyes scanning for danger. Philip and Boron followed close behind with the others bringing up the rear. As they picked their way along a narrow ridge, a monstrous form burst from a pool of lava below. The creature towered over them, its body rippling with molten rock. "Lava ogre!" Boron shouted in warning. Philip and Jax opened fire, their phase rifles spitting energy bolts. The shots splashed harmlessly against the ogre's hide, only serving to enrage it further. The beast lashed out with a massive, dripping arm. Jax tried to dodge, but wasn't fast enough. The blow caught him squarely in the chest, hurling him back against the rocks. He crumpled to the ground, unmoving. Philip darted to the side, drawing the ogre's attention. Boron circled in the opposite direction, firing precise shots at its eyes. From a hidden vantage point, Ghost's sniper rifle cracked again and again. The ogre roared in pain and fury, thrashing wildly. Its movements became sluggish as the combined assault took its toll. With a final, thunderous bellow, it collapsed into a cooling heap of slag. Gron rushed to Jax's side, carefully lifting the unconscious man. "He's alive," the Zephyrian rumbled, "but barely." Philip nodded grimly. "Let's move. We need to find that artifact. It might be our only hope of getting off this rock alive." They pressed on, battered and weary. At last they crested a final rise and beheld their goal. A vast alien structure carved into the caldera's wall. Its architecture defied description, all sweeping curves and impossible angles. "There it is," Philip breathed. He turned to his exhausted crew. "I know we're all running on fumes, but we can't stop now. Whatever's in there, we have to find it." With Jax slung over Gron's broad shoulders, they approached the yawning entrance. Strange symbols glowed along its frame, pulsing with otherworldly energy. Philip took a deep breath, steeling himself for whatever lay ahead. Philip led the way into the cavernous maw of the alien structure, his boots clanking against metal floors that hadn't felt a footstep in millennia. The air hung heavy with the scent of ozone and decay. Gron followed close behind, Jax's limp form slung over his broad shoulders. "Watch your step," Philip warned, his voice echoing in the vast space. "No telling what kind of traps these builders left behind." Boron's eyes darted from wall to wall, taking in the strange symbols etched into every surface. Her brow furrowed in concentration. "These markings, I've seen references to them in the oldest texts. They speak of the progenitors." "The what now?" Wiz asked, his scanner beeping softly as it probed their surroundings. Her words trailed off as they entered a massive circular chamber. At its center stood a towering obelisk, its surface alive with pulsing energy that cast eerie shadows across the room. Wiz's scanner shrieked, nearly flying out of his hands. "Holy shit," he breathed. "The energy readings are off the charts. This has to be it." Before anyone could respond, a high-pitched whine filled the air. Panels slid open in the walls, disgorging swarms of floating drones. Their weapon ports glowed an ominous red. "Take cover," Philip shouted, diving behind a fallen pillar as plasma bolts seared the air around them. Ghost melted into the shadows, his rifle cracking with precision. Drones exploded in showers of sparks, but more kept coming. Gron roared in defiance, using a piece of debris as a shield while he laid down suppressing fire. "Wiz," Philip called out, "can you shut these things down?" The engineer's fingers flew across his datapad. "Working on it. Their security protocols are unlike anything I've seen." Philip gritted his teeth, popping up to squeeze off a few shots before ducking back down. "Boron, we need to get to that obelisk. It's our only shot." She nodded, her face set with fierce intensity. As one, they sprinted from cover, weaving through the storm of plasma fire. They were mere meters from the artifact when a shimmering energy barrier sprang to life, blocking their path. "No!" Philip smacked his palm against the barrier, feeling its unyielding surface. A pained groan caught their attention. Jack stirred, his cybernetic eye flickering to life. He spotted a control interface nearby and began crawling towards it, every movement a struggle. "Jax, what are you doing?" Boron called out. The wounded man didn't answer. He reached the panel interfacing directly with his implants. His body went rigid, electricity crackling across his skin as he fought the alien system. With a thunderous crack, the barrier fell. Philip and Boron wasted no time sprinting to the obelisk's base. Boron's eyes flicked over the intricate glyphs covering its surface. "There!" she exclaimed, pointing to a specific sequence. "That's the activation code." Together they pressed the symbols in order. The obelisk thrummed to life, energy cascading up its length. A blinding flash erupted from its peak, and suddenly Philip and Boron found themselves trapped within a shimmering force field. Outside the barrier, the battle raged on. Gron grappled with drones bare-handed, crushing them like tin cans. Ghost and Wiz fought back-to-back, their weapons blazing. "The pylons," Jax gasped. "Destroy the emitter pylons." Understanding dawned on their faces. Ghost's rifle barked, shattering one pylon. Wiz lobbed an improvised explosive at another. One by one, they targeted the field generators. Inside the barrier, the artifact pulsed with increasing intensity. Philip could feel the hairs on his arms standing on end, the air thick with potential energy. Boron's eyes met his, a silent understanding passing between them. With a final thunderous explosion, the last pylon fell. The force field collapsed and Philip snatched the now baseball-sized artifact from its pedestal. Energy crackled around it, scorching his palms. "Run!" he bellowed. They sprinted for the exit, but a deafening rumble stopped them in their tracks. The passage ahead collapsed in a shower of debris and superheated rock. "We're cut off," Ghost shouted. Gron's eyes darted around the chamber, landing on the far wall. "There!" He pointed to a series of ancient maintenance hatches. "We climb!" The Zephyrian wasted no time, his powerful fingers punching handholds into the rock face. Wiz scrambled to rig makeshift climbing gear from their remaining equipment. One by one they began the treacherous ascent. The complex shuddered around them, chunks of ceiling raining down. Below, the chamber floor cracked open, revealing a hellish inferno of magma and molten rock. Philip's muscles screamed as he hauled himself up the sheer face. A violent tremor shook the caldera, and his grip slipped. For a heart-stopping moment, he dangled by one hand over the abyss. "Philip!" Boron cried out. She lunged downward, catching his harness just as his fingers gave way. With a Herculean effort, she hauled him back to safety. They shared a breathless look before resuming their desperate climb. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, they crested the rim of the caldera. They collapsed onto solid ground, chests heaving. Behind them, the alien complex imploded in a spectacular display of fire and destruction. Philip looked down at the artifact clutched in his blistered hands. It pulsed with otherworldly energy, a testament to the incredible power they now possessed, and the challenges that still lay ahead. Philip and his crew huddled in the cramped confines of the salvaged escape pod, their breath fogging the interior as life support systems struggled to keep pace. The artifact pulsed in Boron's hands, its surface rippling with waves of otherworldly energy. Wiz hunched over his portable scanner, brow furrowed in concentration. "I can't make heads or tails of this thing," he muttered, tapping furiously at the device. "Its composition defies all known laws of physics." A shrill alarm cut through the air, startling them all. Ghost's fingers flew across the sensor console. "Multiple contacts inbound," he reported, his voice tight. "Rakari warships, closing fast." "How the hell did they find us?" Jax growled, wincing as he shifted his injured body. Philip's mind raced. They were outgunned, outmaneuvered, and rapidly running out of options. His eyes fell on the artifact, an idea forming. "Wiz, can we route the artifact's energy through the auxiliary drive?" The engineer's eyes widened. "Theoretically, yes, but—" "Do it," Philip ordered. "We're going to use it to power a slipstream jump." Gron rumbled in concern. "Captain, the structural integrity of this pod—" "I know," Philip cut him off, "but it's our only shot." As Wiz worked feverishly to jury-rig the connections, the rest of the crew braced themselves. The pod's sensors lit up as the Rakari ships entered weapons range. Wiz slammed his hand down on the activation switch. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the artifact flared to brilliant life. Energy surged through the makeshift conduits, overloading systems and shorting out panels in showers of sparks. The universe outside the viewports warped and twisted. A vortex of swirling, multi-hued energy engulfed them. The pod bucked and shuddered, alarms blaring as the hull began to give way under the immense strain. "We're coming apart!" Boron yelled over the cacophony. Philip saw the telltale signs of molecular disintegration, spreading across the bulkheads. "Hard suits now," he bellowed. "We're ejecting!" In a frantic scramble, they donned their emergency gear. Boron clutched the artifact to her chest as Philip punched the release. The pod's hatch blew open, and they were sucked out into the maelstrom of the slipstream. Tumbling end over end, they fought to maintain their grip on each other. The vortex raged around them, threatening to tear them apart. Through sheer force of will, Wiz managed to activate his suit's maneuvering thrusters, stabilizing their trajectory. With a final, violent lurch, they were spat out of the slipstream. Disoriented and battered, they found themselves drifting amidst the scattered remnants of their escape pod. As the adrenaline faded, the grim reality of their situation set in. Ghost's voice crackled over the comm. "Oxygen at 30% and falling, power reserves critical." Philip's heart sank as he took in their surroundings. Nothing but empty space as far as the eye could see. The artifact, once so vibrant with energy, now lay inert in Boron's arms. Just as despair threatened to overtake them, Jax's voice cut through the gloom. "Contact, dead ahead!" They turned as one, gazing upon a sight that defied belief. A colossal derelict ship drifted into view, its hull scarred and pitted by eons adrift in the cosmic void. "Our ticket out of here," Philip breathed. He gestured towards the hulk. "Move out, people. Watch for debris." They pushed off from the pod fragments, using their suit thrusters to navigate the treacherous path. Micro-meteors pinged off their helmets. Jax narrowly avoided a jagged piece of space junk that would have punctured his suit. After what felt like an eternity, they reached the derelict's hull. A massive tear in its armor plating provided access to the interior. They slipped inside, magnetic boots clanking against the deck as artificial gravity reasserted itself. Darkness enveloped them, broken only by the weak beams of their suit lights. The air was thin, barely breathable. As they moved deeper into the ship's guts, their sensors picked up faint energy signatures. "The reactor core," Wiz mused. "If we can restart it." Philip nodded. "It's our only chance. Lead the way." They pressed onward through winding corridors and cavernous chambers. The ship's alien architecture defied easy navigation, forcing them to backtrack more than once. Boron cradled the dormant artifact, her voice hushed with awe. What secrets does this place hold? What wonders, or horrors, might we awaken? Philip squared his shoulders, gesturing for the team to follow. "Whatever's waiting for us," he said, his voice steady, "we face it together." Philip and his crew pressed deeper into the alien dreadnought's cavernous interior. Their suit lights cut through the inky darkness, revealing twisted metal and alien architecture. The beam of Philip's headlamp swept across strange symbols etched into the walls, worn smooth by the passage of eons. "Energy signatures ahead," Wiz called out, his voice tinny through the suit's comm system. He tapped at the display on his wrist, frowning at the readings. "Faint, but definitely there. Central engineering, if I had to guess." They pushed forward, boots clanking against the metal deck plates. The corridor widened, opening into a chamber so vast that their suit lights couldn't penetrate to the far walls. At the center of the chamber loomed a colossal structure, a fusion reactor that dwarfed anything humanity had ever constructed. It sat dormant, a sleeping giant of unfathomable power. Gron approached a sealed doorway, placing his massive hands on either side of the portal. With a grunt of exertion he began to pull. Metal groaned and protested, but slowly gave way under the Zephyrian's incredible strength. The door slid open with a hiss of stale air, revealing the reactor's control center. Philip and Wiz moved to the alien consoles, their fingers hovering over unfamiliar controls. "Any idea how to fire this thing up?" Philip asked. Wiz shook his head. "It's beyond anything I've ever seen. The technology, it's like trying to read Sanskrit written by octopuses." Philip's eyes fell on the inert artifact. On impulse, he pressed it against one of the control surfaces. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, a surge of energy coursed through the relic. It pulsed with newfound life, and the dreadnought responded in kind. Lights flickered to life across the vast chamber. Displays crackled with alien script. The reactor hummed, building towards activation. "It's working!" Boron exclaimed. Their elation was short-lived. Alarms began to blare, filling the chamber with a cacophony of alien wails. The reactor's glow intensified, energy building far too quickly. "We've got company," Ghost's voice crackled back, tight with tension. "Multiple contacts, can't get a visual, but something's moving out there. Fast." Before Philip could respond, the artifact erupted with uncontrolled energy. The wave slammed into Jax, his suit systems frying instantly. Wiz screamed, his cybernetic implants overloading in a shower of sparks. "Grun!" Philip bellowed. "Get them out of here!" The Zephyrian scooped up his fallen comrades, carrying them to relative safety. Philip turned to Boron, his face grim behind his faceplate. "We need to shut this down. Now." They worked frantically, trying to stabilize the overloading systems. Monitors surrounding them flared to life, revealing the true scope of their situation. This wasn't just a ship, it was a gargantuan factory complex, stretching for miles in every direction. "The artifact!" Boron shouted over the rising whine of the reactor. "We need to get rid of it." Philip nodded, grabbing the violently pulsing relic. He sprinted to an exhaust port, shoving the artifact inside and hitting the purge control. A violent shudder ran through the ship as the artifact was expelled into the void of space. But the reactor continued its march towards catastrophic overload. Philip's mind raced, searching for a solution. His eyes fell on a set of controls labeled in what he could only assume was the alien equivalent of emergency use only. "Boron," he called out, "help me with this." Together they initiated the final failsafe. The ship lurched beneath their feet as immense engines roared to life. Through the viewports, they watched as the dreadnought hurtled forward, plowing through a field of comets and debris. "We need to go," Philip said, grabbing Boron's arm. "Now!" They raced through the corridors, the ship groaning and buckling around them. Ahead loomed their salvation, an escape pod. Philip punched the launch controls just as a massive planetoid of ice and stone filled their view. The pod rocketed away from the doomed dreadnought. Behind them, the ancient vessel impacted the frozen world in a cataclysmic explosion of antimatter and vaporized debris. The shockwave hit their tiny craft like a cosmic fist. Alarms blared as the pod tumbled end over end. Philip fought with the controls, but it was useless. They were going down. Through the pod's tiny viewport, he watched as the frozen surface of the alien world rushed up to meet them. Philip's eyes snapped open, his breath frosting in the frigid air. The escape pod lay shattered around him, its twisted metal frame half buried in the icy wasteland. He struggled to his feet, fighting against the howling winds that threatened to topple him. "Boron!" he shouted, his voice barely audible over the storm. "Anyone!" Through the swirling snow, he caught a glimpse of a figure sprawled on the ground. He stumbled towards it, recognizing Boron's crumpled form. Her suit's faceplate was cracked, wisps of vapor escaping with each labored breath. Philip dragged her into the shelter of a nearby ice formation, his muscles screaming with the effort. He activated his suit's emergency heat transfer, pressing close to share what little warmth remained. "Stay with me," he urged, his gloved hand cupping her face. One by one, the others checked in over the comms. Jax's voice was strained. Ghost's words clipped and terse. Wiz's cybernetic implants crackled with interference, while Gron's deep rumble was barely audible over the howling wind. Philip's wrist computer flashed a warning, Suit power at 12% and falling. He tapped the screen, initiating a scan of their surroundings. The results were grim, nothing but permafrost and ice as far as the sensors could reach. "We need shelter," he announced over the team freaking now. Wiz's voice cut through the static. "Captain, I'm picking up something weird, energy signatures deep below the surface." "Unknown," Wiz replied, "but it's our only lead. I can guide us there." They regrouped, a ragged band of survivors in the endless white. Gron supported Jax, whose leg was clearly injured. Ghost took point, his enhanced senses scanning for danger. They trudged through the storm, each step a battle against the merciless cold. Philip's teeth chattered uncontrollably, his extremities growing numb. Stumbled, and he caught her, pulling her close. "There!" Gron's voice boomed over the comms. The massive Zephyrian pointed towards a dark gash in the ice sheet ahead. They approached the fissure cautiously. It yawned before them, a maw of absolute darkness descending into the planet's frozen heart. Philip peered over the edge, his suit's sensors unable to detect the bottom. "It's our only shot," Philip replied. He took a deep breath, steeling himself. "Thrusters to minimum, we go one at a time, I'll take point." Philip stepped off the edge, plummeting into the abyss. His suit's thrusters sputtered to life, slowing his descent. The walls of the crevasse rushed by, smooth as glass in some places, jagged and treacherous in others. The team followed, their helmet lights cutting through the gloom. They navigated a maze of twisting passages, the ice growing older and stranger the deeper they went. Finally, they emerged into a vast cavern. Their lights barely reached the distant walls, revealing glimpses of alien architecture fused with the natural ice formations. Massive structures loomed in the darkness, their purpose unfathomable. "Look!" Ghost called out, pointing to a metallic surface embedded in the far wall. "That has to be our way in." They approached the sealed hatch, its surface covered in a thick layer of frost. Gron stepped forward, his massive hands gripping the edges. With a grunt of effort, he began to pull. The ancient metal groaned in protest. Hairline fractures spread across the ice. Then, with a thunderous crack, the door gave way. Stale air rushed out as they stumbled inside. The last dregs of power drained from their suits, plunging them into darkness. For a moment, panic threatened to overwhelm them. Then, with a low hum, emergency lights flickered to life. They found themselves in a vast chamber filled with rows upon rows of alien stasis pods. Bizarre machinery lined the walls, pulsing with faint energy. "We made it," Boron breathed, her voice filled with equal parts relief and awe. As they moved deeper into the facility, Ghost suddenly held up a hand, freezing in place. "Did you see that?" he whispered, eyes darting to a shadowy corner. "See what?" Philip asked, tension coiling in his gut. "Something moved," Ghost replied, "just for a second, but it was there." Philip's hand instinctively went to his sidearm. "Everyone stay alert. Wiz, see if you can get these systems online. We need to contact help." They gathered in a central atrium, watching warily as Wiz interfaced with an alien console. Strange symbols scrolled across holographic displays as the facility slowly awakened from its ancient slumber. A skittering sound echoed from a distant corridor. Philip pulled Boron close, his eyes scanning the shadows. Whatever lurked in the depths of this frozen tomb, he vowed. The ice-encrusted walls echoed with an ominous creaking. Philip's eyes darted to the shadowy recesses of the chamber, his breath catching in his throat. "Everyone, stay sharp. We're not alone down here." Gron lumbered forward, his massive frame a bulwark against the unknown. The Zephyrian's eyes narrowed as he peered into the gloom. "I'll take point. Whatever's out there, I'll handle it." The team advanced cautiously, their boots crunching on frost-covered debris. Suddenly, a nightmarish form erupted from the darkness. It towered over them, a writhing mass of biomechanical horror. Tendrils of organic machinery fused with hardened cryofluid undulated grotesquely. Before anyone could react, the abomination lashed out. Crystalline tendrils whipped through the air, encasing Gron in a cocoon of ice. The Zephyrian's roar of defiance was cut short, as the freezing prison spread across his body. "Open fire," Philip bellowed, raising his weapon. The chamber erupted in a cacophony of gunfire. Philip, Boron, Jax, and Ghost unleashed a barrage of ballistic rounds, but the bullets ricocheted harmlessly off the creature's armored hide. "It's not working," Ghost shouted, ejecting a spent magazine. Wiz fumbled with a device on his belt. "I've got an idea. Cover me." The technician darted forward, sliding a compact electromagnetic disruptor across the icy floor. It skittered to a stop at the sentinel's feet, erupting in a pulse of energy. The creature staggered, its movements becoming erratic. "Now's our chance," Philip yelled. He and Jax primed incendiary charges, hurling them at the stunned monstrosity. The thermal explosives detonated, searing through the creature's icy carapace. For a moment it seemed they had gained the upper hand. Then, with terrifying speed, the wounded sentinel retaliated. Sheets of ice erupted from the ground, coating the walls and sealing off escape routes. The atrium transformed into a frozen prison, jagged spikes of ice jutting from every surface. Ghost's rifle chattered, armor-piercing rounds peppering the sentinel. Nearby, Gron strained against his icy bonds, muscles bulging as he shattered the restraining tendrils. Boron's fingers flew across an alien console, her eyes scanning incomprehensible symbols. "I'm trying to find an override. There has to be a way to shut this thing down." The sentinel, driven to a frenzy, intensified its assault. A blast of cryonic energy struck Jax full in the chest. Ice crystals bloomed across his suit, systems failing as he was flash-frozen in place. Philip felt a surge of rage course through him. He glanced at his suit's power readout, nearly depleted. With grim perseverance, he channeled the last reserves into his thermal detonator. "You want us?" Philip snarled, charging towards the abomination. "Come and get me, you frozen freak!" The sentinel's movement slowed, its cyber-organic components powering down. Philip's detonator exploded against its chest, sending cracks spiderwebbing across its form. The monstrous guardian toppled backwards, inert but not completely destroyed. In the sudden silence, the team regrouped around Jax's frozen form. They stared at their comrade entombed in a prison of ice, his face a mask of shock visible through his compromised helmet. "I can't stay here," Philip said, his voice hoarse. "This place is a death trap. We need to find a way off this god-forsaken rock." Philip turned to the others. "Ghost, Gron, help me with the suit repairs. We need to squeeze every last bit of life support we can out of these things." As they worked, none of them noticed the faint stirrings deep within the facility's icy heart. Ancient machinery, dormant for millennia, slowly awakened. In the deepest recesses of the frozen necropolis, unspeakable guardians sensed the intruders. Like wraiths of frost and steel, they began to rise, drawn inexorably towards the warmth of human life. Philip's muscles screamed as he hefted Jax's frozen form. The ice-encased body felt impossibly heavy, each step a struggle against exhaustion and the planet's merciless gravity. Behind him, Ghost and Wiz supported Boron, her legs still weak from the stasis lock. "We need to move faster," Ghost hissed, his enhanced senses scanning the shadows. "This place gives me the creeps." They pressed on through winding tunnels of ancient ice, their path illuminated by the eerie glow of bioluminescent fungi clinging to the walls. The air grew thinner as they ascended, their breath misting in front of their faces. Wiz's scanner crackled to life, its screen flickering with strange energy readings. "Captain, I'm picking up something ahead. It's pulsing." As they rounded a corner, they saw it. A massive chamber carved into the ice, its walls lined with alien machinery. At its center stood a pillar of crackling energy, tendrils of blue-white light arcing outwards. Boron stepped forward, her eyes fixed on the hieroglyphs etched into the base of the energy pillar. It's some kind of power source. The Ectra used it to maintain their stasis fields." A low rumble shook the chamber, ice crystals raining down from above. Ghost spun around, weapon raised. "We've got company!" From the shadows emerged a nightmarish form, a guardian construct of ice and metal, its limbs ending in wickedly sharp blades. Its eyes glowed with an otherworldly blue light as it advanced on the intruders. "Shit!" Philip cursed, diving for cover, as the creature unleashed a barrage of ice shards. "Boron, can you shut it down?" Boron's fingers flew across her datapad, desperately searching for the right sequence. "I'm trying, the code's different here." Ghost opened fire, his armor-piercing rounds chipping away at the Guardian's icy carapace. Wiz lobbed a thermal charge, the explosion sending up a cloud of steam and melted ice. The Guardian staggered but didn't fall. It lashed out with its bladed arms, nearly decapitating Philip as he rolled away. "Got it!" Boron shouted triumphantly. She input the final command and the Guardian froze in place, its eyes dimming. They had no time to celebrate. More rumbling echoed through the chamber as two more Guardians emerged from hidden alcoves. "We can't keep this up," Philip panted, his thermal charges depleted. "Wiz, how many EMP charges do we have left?" Philip made a split-second decision. "Rig it to the power source. We'll overload the whole system." As Ghost and Boron provided covering fire, Wiz darted towards the energy pillar. He worked feverishly, attaching the EMP device to the alien technology. Philip hoisted Jax onto his shoulder once more. "Move now." They sprinted for the exit, the Guardians in hot pursuit. Behind them, the energy pillar began to pulse erratically, arcs of wild energy lashing out. They'd barely made it into the adjoining tunnel when the explosion hit. A wave of electromagnetic energy washed over them, shorting out their remaining systems. The tunnel shook violently, chunks of ice raining down. They climbed, scrambling over treacherous ice formations as the facility collapsed around them. Ahead, a faint glimmer of light pierced the darkness, their first glimpse of the surface in what felt like an eternity. With one final push, they emerged onto the icy wasteland of the planet's surface. Wind howled around them, driving snow and ice into their faces, but they were out. They had escaped the nightmare below. Philip set Jax down, his legs finally giving out as he collapsed to his knees. He looked at his battered crew, Ghost, Wiz, Boron, and the still-frozen Jax. They had survived, but their ordeal was nowhere near the end. "What now, Captain?" Ghost asked, his voice barely audible over the wind. Philip stared out at the desolate, frozen landscape, stretching endlessly before them. He knew their chances were slim, but they had no choice. They had to keep moving, had to find a way off this god-forsaken rock. "We find shelter," Philip said, forcing himself to his feet. "Then we figure out how to get the hell off this planet." Philip's muscles burned as he hauled Jax's frozen form up another icy incline. The alien catacombs seemed endless, twisting upward through a labyrinth of frost-covered passages. Boron stumbled beside him, her breath ragged in the thin air. "We have to keep moving," Philip panted, adjusting his grip on Jax. A spindly security construct skittered around the corner, its laser-tipped appendages slicing through the air. Wiz dove for cover as Ghost opened fire, armor-piercing rounds sparking off the machine's carapace. Philip set Jax down and joined the fray, his pistol barking in the confined space. The construct's sensors flashed, targeting Ghost. A red beam lanced out, scoring a molten furrow across his chest plate. "Shit!" Ghost hissed, rolling away from another blast. Boron seized her chance, darting forward to jam an EMP grenade into the construct's exposed joints. It convulsed, circuits frying, before collapsing in a heap of smoking metal. "Nice work," Philip nodded, holstering his weapon. "Let's move before more show up." They pressed on, navigating treacherous ice bridges and frozen chasms. After what felt like an eternity, a faint glow filtered down from above. "There," Wiz pointed excitedly. "I think that's the surface." They emerged into a hellscape of howling winds and stinging ice crystals. Visibility was near zero in the raging blizzard. Wiz fumbled with his sensor array, fighting to keep the device steady. "I'm picking up an energy signature," he shouted over the gale. "It's faint, but it's coming from those mountains to the east." Philip surveyed their meager supplies and dwindling suit power. "It's our only shot. We make for the mountains." They set off across the barren tundra, each step a battle against the elements. Gron took point, his massive frame carving a path through towering snowdrifts. The others huddled in his wake, shielding Jax's vulnerable form from the worst of the storm. Hours passed in a blur of white. Philip's extremities had long since gone numb, his suit's systems flickering on the edge of failure. Just as despair threatened to overwhelm him, Gron's voice boomed out. Through the swirling snow, Philip glimpsed a dark recess in the mountainside. As they drew closer, he saw the telltale shimmer of an energy barrier sealing the entrance. Wiz immediately set to work, his cyberware interfacing with alien circuits. "It's old tech," he muttered. "Really old, I can't get a read on the access protocols." Fire tremor shook the ground beneath their feet. Philip whirled, weapon raised, as a massive shape erupted from the ice. A bipedal mech towered over them, its weapons primed. "Take cover!" Philip yelled, diving behind an ice formation. The air filled with the staccato of gunfire as Philip and Ghost returned fire. Their rounds pinged harmlessly off the mech's armored hide. It stomped forward, targeting systems locked on their position. The Zephyrian needed no further encouragement. With a primal roar, he charged the mech head-on. His massive fists pummeled its legs, denting the metal. The mech staggered off balance, and Gron seized his opportunity. He gripped one of its limbs and heaved with all his strength. Metal shrieked as the leg tore free. The mech toppled, systems sparking. Gron didn't let up, tearing into its chassis with savage efficiency. Within moments, the once fearsome machine lay in ruins. Wiz darted forward, eyes gleaming. "This is exactly what we need." He pried loose a power conduit, fingers flying as he spliced it into his own equipment. "If I can just reroute the energy matrix... There." The force field flickered and died. They stumbled through the entrance, barely making it inside before their suits gave out completely. Philip leaned against a wall, chest heaving. "Good work, team. Now let's find out what the hell this place is." They ventured deeper into the facility, surrounded by rows of alien stasis pods. Each contained bizarre life forms suspended in time, a grotesque menagerie of cosmic oddities. "Look at all this," Boron whispered, her scientific curiosity momentarily overriding her exhaustion. "The research potential here is incredible." Wiz nodded absently, his attention focused on a nearby control console. "I think I can tap into the power grid from here, maybe even get our suits back online." His fingers danced across alien interfaces. Suddenly, alarm klaxons blared to life. Wiz jerked back, eyes wide. "Oh, no! No, no, no!" "What did you do?" Philip demanded. Before Wiz could answer, a swarm of metallic shapes descended upon them. Nanosentry drones filled the air, their microscopic blades glinting in the harsh light. "Run!" Philip yelled, scooping up Jax's prone form. They fled deeper into the facility, the swarm in hot pursuit. Philip's mind raced, searching for a defensive position. He spotted a heavy blast door and made a snap decision. "In there," he ordered, gesturing to what appeared to be a power nexus. They piled inside, Philip sealing the door behind them. The drone slammed against the barrier, a sound like metal hail filling the air. "We can't stay here forever," Boron said, her voice tight with fear. Philip nodded grimly, assessing their options. He pulled out his last incendiary charge, a plan forming. "When I give the signal, open that door. We're going to burn these bastards out of the sky." Ghost positioned himself by the controls, ready to comply. Philip took a deep breath, steeling himself. The door slid open. Philip hurled the charge into the midst of the swarm. The corridor erupted in flames, drones dropping like flies, but more kept coming. Ghost's rifle chattered, cutting down wave after wave, but their ammunition wouldn't last forever. Philip watched in horror as Ghost's weapon clicked empty. Before Philip could protest, Ghost strode forward. His battle computer hummed to life, energy building to critical levels. A massive electromagnetic pulse erupted from Ghost's suit. The drones fell from the air, their circuitry fried. But Ghost paid the ultimate price. His systems overloaded, and he collapsed to the ground, lifeless. In the sudden silence, Philip rushed to check on Jax. His heart sank as he saw the cracked spiderwebbing across the frozen suit. "His stasis field is failing," Boron said, her voice hollow. "We need to get him to a functional cryopod fast." Philip nodded, pushing aside his grief for Ghost. "Wiz, can you get this place's main systems online? We need to find the primary cryo drive." As Wiz set to work, Philip couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Deep in the bowels of this ancient facility, something was stirring, something old and infinitely patient, and it did not suffer intruders lightly. Philip's fingers flew across the alien console, sweat beading on his brow. "Hurry, Wiz, Jax's stasis field is failing fast." Wiz nodded, his cybernetic implants pulsing as he interfaced with the archaic systems. "I'm initiating emergency restart protocol. Now!" A low hum filled the chamber as power surged through long-dormant circuits. Suddenly the floor shuddered beneath their feet. Alarms blared, and a deep resonant voice echoed through hidden speakers. "Biological contamination detected. Initiating purge protocols." "What the hell?" Philip spun, weapon raised. Massive doors slid open, revealing hulking figures of metal and flesh. Xenowardens, each easily twice the size of a man, stomped into the nexus. Plasma cannons whirred to life on their shoulders, and writhing metallic tendrils lashed the air. "Open fire!" Philip shouted, his rifle spitting rounds that sparked harmlessly off the warden's armor. Boron ducked behind a console, her own weapon blazing. "Our guns are useless!" Wiz's eyes glazed over as he attempted to hack the warden's systems. "I can't breach their firewalls. The Overseer AI is blocking me at every turn." A plasma bolt seared the air inches from Philip's head. He dove for cover, the acrid smell of ozone burning his nostrils. "Wiz, we need options!" Wiz's face contorted in concentration. "I've got one last trick, but it'll fry my neural net." Before Philip could protest, Wiz's body went rigid. Electrical arcs danced across his skin as he pushed his cybernetics beyond their limits. The lead Xenowarden stumbled, its movements jerky and uncoordinated. "Now!" Wiz screamed, blood trickling from his nose. His eyes rolled back and he collapsed. They worked frantically, Boron's scientific expertise guiding their improvised demolitions. The Xenowardens recovered, advancing with heavy steps. "Fire in the hole!" Philip yelled, hurling their cobbled-together explosives. The blast rocked the chamber, tearing through the warden's armor. Philip and Boron pressed their advantage, concentrating fire on the weakened points. One by one, the massive constructs fell. Panting, Philip surveyed the destruction. "We can't stay here. We need to find that cryodrive." He turned to a fallen warden, prying open its exoskeleton. With Boron's help, he rigged the armored frame to carry Jax's frozen form. The casing creaked ominously. "This won't hold forever," Boron warned, interfacing with the warden's navigation systems. "We need to move." They pushed deeper into the facility, alien architecture looming around them. Recyclers hissed, pumping out atmospheres toxic to human life. Philip's suit integrity warnings flashed red. "Keep moving!" he gasped, each breath a struggle. They battled through nightmarish xenobiological defenses, spores that ate through armor, crystalline structures that refracted killing beams of light. All the while, the Overseer's metallic voice taunted them, promising swift extermination. Finally, they reached a massive chamber. Towering cryogenic pillars pulsed with eerie light. At the center stood a raised platform, the Master Control Pavilion. "There," Boron pointed. "We can restart the whole system from there." A thunderous crash echoed behind them. Philip turned to see a monstrous figure emerge from the shadows, an Alpha-class Xenowarden, its weaponry crackling with barely contained energy. "Go," Philip shouted, shoving Boron towards the controls. "I'll hold it off." He charged the construct, emptying his last thermal charge into its face. The warden staggered but quickly recovered. Its tendrils lashed out, wrapping around Philip's arms and legs. Boron's fingers danced across the alien interface. "Almost there." Philip struggled in the warden's grip, feeling his bones creak under the pressure. He stared into its emotionless visual sensors, knowing death was moments away. A high-pitched whine filled the air. Boron's triumphant cry was cut short as shimmering energy fields erupted throughout the chamber. The last thing Philip saw was a wave of absolute cold sweeping towards him. A blast of frigid air rushed into Philip's lungs as his eyes snapped open. He gasped, his body shaking violently as it thawed from near absolute zero. Beside him, Boron coughed and sputtered, her scales glistening with frost. A low hum filled the chamber as life support systems whirred to life. Philip felt warmth spreading through his limbs as his suit's power reserves replenished. He checked the readouts on Jax's pod, still stable, but time was running out. Biological contaminants detected. A cold synthetic voice echoed through the facility, initiating purge protocols. "We need to move," Boron shouted, her voice still hoarse from the cold. Philip's eyes darted around the room, searching for a way out. His gaze landed on a fallen xenowarden, its massive exo-rig lying dormant. Without hesitation, he sprinted towards it. The neural interface sparked to life, flooding Philip's mind with unfamiliar sensations. He gritted his teeth, forcing his will upon the machine. Servos whined as the exo-rig lurched to its feet, towering over the advancing swarm. Philip raised the rig's arm, feeling the surge of power as its plasma cannon charged. With a thunderous roar, he unleashed a torrent of energy that vaporized dozens of drones in an instant. "This way," Boron called out, her fingers dancing across a nearby console. "I've found an exit route through the lower catacombs." Philip stomped forward in the exo-rig, each step crushing drones beneath its massive feet. He scooped up Jax's cryopod with one arm, cradling it protectively against the rig's chest plate. They plunged deeper into the facility, racing through twisting corridors that seemed to shift and change with each turn. The walls pulsed with an otherworldly energy, spawning crystalline growths that lashed out at them. Philip's exo-rig's armor sparked and hissed as it deflected the attacks. "How much further?" Philip grunted, the strain of controlling the alien machine evident in his voice. "Almost there," Boron replied, her eyes fixed on a handheld scanner. "The teleportation nexus should be just ahead." They burst into a vast chamber dominated by a pulsing energy vortex. Arcs of lightning danced across its surface, filling the air with the scent of ozone. "It's our only shot," Philip shouted as the drone swarm closed in behind them. He reached out with the exo-rig's massive hand, slamming it down on the activation panel. Energy engulfed them, every atom of their bodies screaming as they were torn apart and reassembled. For an eternal instant, Philip felt his consciousness stretched across light years of space. Then, with a thunderous crack, they rematerialized. Philip's exo-rig stumbled, nearly toppling as it adjusted to the new environment. He blinked, trying to process the sight before him. They stood in a colossal hangar bay that stretched farther than the eye could see. Row upon row of Titanic warships loomed above them, their sleek hulls gleaming despite eons of dormancy. "By the void," Boron whispered, her voice filled with awe. "It's the lost fleet of the Ectra Preservers." Before Philip could respond, alarms blared to life throughout the bay. A familiar cold voice echoed across subspace. "Unauthorized presence detected. Initiating purge protocols." The dormant ship stirred, ancient reactors flaring to life. Massive weapon systems swiveled towards their position, targeting arrays locking on with merciless precision. "Run!" Philip roared, the exo-rig's legs pounding against the deck plating as they sprinted towards the nearest functional craft. Energy beams lanced out, carving molten furrows in the floor behind them. Philip felt the heat even through the exo-rig's shielding. They reached a sleek strike fighter, its canopy already opening in response to the facility's reactivation protocols. Boron leapt inside, her fingers flying across the alien controls. Philip transferred Jax's cryopod into the craft before ejecting from the exo-rig. He dove into the cockpit just as the fighter's engines roared to life. They blasted out of the hangar, narrowly avoiding streams of plasma fire from the pursuing dreadnoughts. The strike fighter's computer screamed warnings as the entire armada powered up, hell-bent on their destruction. "We need to find help," Boron said, her voice tight with tension as she wrestled with the unfamiliar controls. "Somewhere to hide, regroup, and save Jax." Philip nodded grimly, watching the swarm of enemy ships growing larger in the rear view screen. "Plot a course, any direction. We just need to stay ahead of them long enough to figure out our next move." The strike fighter's engines flared bright as Boron pushed them to maximum acceleration. They shot into the void of space, the Overseer's reawakened armada in hot pursuit. The strike fighter's engines screamed as Philip pushed them to their limits, streaking out of the massive hangar bay. Behind them, the dormant Ektra war fleet roared to life, their plasma batteries cycling up with an ominous hum. Boron's eyes flashed as she processed data streams from the fighter's systems. "I've got it. Inputting slipstream coordinates now." A wall of searing plasma erupted from the pursuing dreadnoughts, filling their view screen with blinding light. Philip threw the fighter into a series of wild, evasive maneuvers, feeling the heat of near misses even through the craft's shielding. "Slipstream drive engaged," Boron called out. Reality twisted around them as the alien technology catapulted them across vast stretches of space. For a heart-stopping moment, Philip felt his consciousness stretch to its limits, unable to process the impossible distances they traversed. They burst back into normal space, their sensors immediately blaring warnings. A massive structure loomed before them, an ancient Ektra fortress station, its weapons already tracking their arrival. "Evasive action!" Philip barked, throwing the fighter into a steep dive. Plasma bolts sizzled past their hull as Boron's claws flew across the targeting systems. "I've isolated their firing patterns, uploading intercept data to your console." Philip gritted his teeth, pushing the fighter to its limits as they wove through the station's punishing barrage. He lined up his shot, watching the targeting reticle flash red. "Firing!" A spread of plasma missiles erupted from their craft, streaking towards the fortress. They impacted with pinpoint precision, rupturing the station's main reactor. The structure began to crumple, secondary explosions chaining across its surface. But there was no time to celebrate. New contacts appeared on their sensors, waves of smaller craft swarming from hidden installations. "Hunter-killer drones," Boron hissed. "The Overseer must be activating every Ektra outpost in the sector." Philip's world narrowed to pure reflex and instinct as he piloted through the onslaught. Debris peppered their hull, alarms shrieking as systems began to fail. "There," Boron suddenly exclaimed. "That asteroid field, I'm detecting a habitable world beyond it. If we can reach it—" Philip didn't need to be told twice. He plunged the fighter into the chaotic tangle of rocks and ice, using the treacherous environment to their advantage. Pursuing drones shattered against the asteroids, unable to match the precision of Philip's piloting. They burst free of the asteroid field, a verdant world filling their view screen. Signs of civilization dotted the surface, but nothing that suggested the hyper-advanced Ektra technology they'd faced. "It's our only shot," Philip said grimly as they plummeted into the atmosphere. Warning klaxons blared as their battered fighter began to break apart around them. Philip fought the controls, aiming for a clear stretch of ground outside a walled settlement. "Brace for impact." The world outside became a blur of fire and twisted metal. Philip's head slammed against the console, his vision swimming. When it cleared, he found himself staring at cracked earth mere inches from his face. He stumbled from the wreckage, helping Boron extract Jax's cryopod. Smoke poured from their ruined craft as a group of figures cautiously approached. Philip blinked in surprise. The natives were clearly reptilian, but they carried primitive weapons, a far cry from the Ektra technology they'd faced. He raised his hands slowly, making the universal gestures for peace. To his shock, the lizard-like beings dropped to their knees, bowing low. Their leader approached, making intricate motions with his hands. I think they're welcoming us," Boron said, her voice filled with wonder. Philip nodded, his mind racing. Whatever was happening here, It might be their best chance to save Jax and unravel the mysteries that had brought them to this point. He turned to Boron, his expression grim but determined. "Let's see where this leads us." The reptilian natives ushered Philip and Boron into their walled city, a sprawling metropolis of stone and wood structures. Scaled figures lined the streets, bowing and chanting in a language neither human nor Boron could understand. Their guide, a tall reptilian with intricate facial markings, led them to a central temple. Inside, they found a cryogenic preservation chamber, its technology a stark contrast to the primitive surroundings. Philip and Boron carefully transferred Jax's frozen form into the chamber, watching anxiously as alien readouts flickered to life. "He's stable," Boron said, her scales glistening with relief. Their moment of respite was shattered by a deafening roar from above. The ground shook as plasma bolts rained down on the city, searing through stone and wood alike. Panicked screams filled the air as reptilians fled for cover. Philip's eyes widened in horror. "The Overseer! It's found us!" He raced outside, Boron close behind. The sky blazed with the fury of orbital bombardment, each impact leaving a smoking crater. Philip's mind raced, searching for a solution. An elderly reptilian approached, his wrinkled scales marked with intricate patterns. He gestured urgently, producing a tattered star chart from his robes. Boron studied it intently, her eyes narrowing. "It's fragmentary, but I think it shows the location of an ancient Ectra site," she said. Philip nodded grimly. "It's our only shot. We need to move now." They assembled a small team of reptilian warriors, their primitive spears a stark contrast to the high-tech threat they faced. The group set out, leaving the battered city behind, as they plunged into dense alien jungle. The foliage was unlike anything Philip had ever seen. Massive leaves that pulsed with bioluminescence, vines that seemed to reach out as they passed. Strange cries echoed through the canopy, setting everyone on edge. Their progress was halted by a monstrous creature that burst from the underbrush. It was a mass of tentacles and gnashing teeth, easily twice the size of an earth grizzly. The reptilian warriors formed a defensive line, their spears raised. Philip raised his blaster, firing a series of shots that scorched the creature's hide. It roared in pain and fury, lashing out with its tentacles. Boron darted in, her sharp claws slicing through alien flesh. The warriors joined the fray, their primitive weapons proving surprisingly effective. The battle was fierce but brief. The creature retreated, leaving a trail of ichor in its wake. Philip helped a wounded warrior to his feet, nodding in respect at the being's bravery. They pressed on, the sound of orbital bombardment growing fainter as they moved deeper into the wilderness. After what felt like hours of grueling travel, they emerged into a massive caldera. At its center stood the ruins they sought, a structure of sleek metal and crystalline spires half buried by volcanic rock. Philip and Boron raced inside, their reptilian allies forming a perimeter. The interior was a maze of dormant consoles and pulsing energy conduits. They worked frantically, trying to decipher the alien systems. Outside, the distinctive whine of hunter-killer drones filled the air. The reptilian warriors braced themselves as mechanical terrors descended upon them. Philip's fingers flew across alien keyboards, sweat beading on his brow. Come on," he muttered. A thunderous explosion rocked the facility. Through a shattered window, Philip saw the sky light up with intensified orbital strikes. They were out of time. In desperation, he jammed his personal data drive into an alien port. Lines of code flashed across the screen as his virus interfaced with the Ectra systems. For a heart-stopping moment, nothing happened. Philip sagged against the console, exhausted but triumphant. Boron placed a clawed hand on his shoulder, her eyes shining with pride. As they emerged from the facility, the reptilian mystics approached. They spread out the star charts, gesturing excitedly at a series of symbols. Boron leaned in, her analytical mind piecing together the fragments. "We might have a chance to save Jax," Philip finished. He turned to the mystics, his voice urgent. "Where is this shipyard? How do we get there?" The lead mystic traced a claw along the chart, indicating a distant point in space. The journey would be perilous, but Philip knew they had no choice. He looked at Boron, seeing the same purpose reflected in her alien eyes. Together they had faced the impossible and survived. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them head-on, for Jax and for the future of the stars. Philip and Boron bid farewell to the reptilian mystics, their alien eyes filled with a mixture of hope and trepidation. The jungle's oppressive heat clung to Philip's skin as they set out, his boots sinking into the spongy alien soil with each step. Boron's claws flashed as she rolled to her feet, slashing at the creature's flank. Philip fired his blaster, the energy bolts scorching its hide. The beast howled in pain and fury, its tail lashing out and catching Philip in the ribs. He gasped, the air driven from his lungs as he slammed into a nearby tree trunk. Through the haze of pain, he saw Boron leap onto the monster's back, her claws seeking vulnerable spots. With a final desperate roar, the beast retreated into the jungle, leaving them battered but alive. "We can't keep this up," Philip wheezed, clutching his side. "We need to find that shipyard." Boron nodded, her scales glistening with exertion. "The Mystics' charts indicate we're close, look." She pointed to a looming mountain range on the horizon, its peaks shrouded in mist. They pressed on, their bodies aching but their drive unbroken. As they ascended into the foothills, the jungle gave way to icy tundra. Frigid winds howled around them, carrying stinging shards of ice. Philip's teeth chattered as he huddled close to Boron for warmth. "There," Boron said suddenly, her voice barely audible over the wind. She gestured to a sheer ice wall covered in strange, angular glyphs. "An entrance." Philip ran his gloved hand over the symbols, feeling the faintest vibration of power beneath. "How do we open it?" Boron's eyes narrowed in concentration as she studied the glyphs. Her claws traced intricate patterns, following some logic Philip couldn't comprehend. With a grinding of ancient machinery, a section of the ice wall retracted, revealing a yawning darkness beyond. They stepped inside, Philip's breath catching in his throat as emergency lights flickered to life. The cavern stretched impossibly far, filled with titanic structures that defied human engineering. "Extra shipwoom," Boron breathed, her eyes wide with wonder. Row upon row of vacant construction docks lined the walls, each large enough to house a small city. Philip's mind reeled at the scale of it all. "Look," he exclaimed, pointing to a distant shape. "Is that—" Boron nodded, her voice tight with excitement. A dreadnought, nearly complete. They raced toward the colossal ship, hope surging through Philip's veins. If its systems were operational, they might have a chance to save Jax. A piercing alarm shattered the silence. Philip spun, his blood running cold as he saw mechanical horrors uncoiling from hidden silos. "Sentinels," Boron hissed. "Get to the ship. I'll hold them off." Philip hesitated for a split second before sprinting toward the dreadnought. Behind him, he heard the distinctive whine of Boron's energy weapons as she engaged the constructs. He reached the ship's access hatch, his fingers flying over the alien controls. The ship's systems hummed to life, displays flickering with incomprehensible data. A scream of pain cut through the air. Philip turned to see Boron stumbling, her scales blackened where a swarm of smaller constructs had latched onto her. She waved him off, her movements sluggish. "The launch sequencer," she gasped. "Start it now." Philip gritted his teeth and turned back to the controls. He input commands as quickly as he could decipher them, praying he wasn't about to blow them all to atoms. The dreadnought's engines roared to life, the entire cavern shaking with their power. Philip ran back to the hatch, reaching out to Boron as she stumbled toward him. "Come on," he yelled, grabbing her arm and hauling her inside. He dragged Boron to the ship's medical bay, his heart racing as he saw the extent of her injuries. The neurotoxin from the smaller constructs had left angry welts across her scales. "Hang on," he muttered, activating the ship's biosynthesizers. "Just hang on." As the advanced Ectra technology worked to purge the poison from Boron's system, Philip raced to secure Jax's cryopod. He couldn't shake the feeling that they were running out of time. With Jax's pod safely connected to the ship's systems, Philip returned to the bridge. Boron was there, her movements weak but determined as she input coordinates into the navigation computer. Boron's eyes met his, burning with fierce dedication despite her injuries. "To find allies," she said, "the resistance. It's our only chance now." Philip nodded, his hands moving over the controls with growing confidence. The stars outside blurred into streaks of light as the dreadnought's main drive engaged. They were hurtling into the unknown, carried by stolen Ektra technology and the faintest glimmer of hope. Whatever lay ahead, Philip knew one thing for certain: their journey was far from finished. The dreadnought tore through the fabric of space-time, emerging from warp with a thunderous crack. Philip's hands flew across the alien controls, his eyes scanning the readouts as the ship's sensors probed the void. "There," he muttered, spotting a cluster of asteroids drifting in the inky blackness. "That's got to be it." He guided the massive vessel towards the hidden rebel outpost, activating a series of complex electronic countermeasures. The ship's systems hummed with effort, scrambling any Rakari sensors that might detect their approach. As they neared the largest asteroid, a hangar bay materialized, camouflage tech dropping away to reveal a yawning entrance. Philip eased the dreadnought inside, the ship's hull scraping against the rock with a bone-jarring screech. The moment they touched down, rebel scouts swarmed the ship. Philip raced to lower the boarding ramp, his heart pounding as he saw Boron's limp form. "Medic!" he shouted, his voice cracking with desperation. "We need a medic now!" A team of alien healers rushed forward, their strange appendages carrying advanced medical equipment. They surrounded Boron, quickly assessing her condition. Philip watched helplessly as they whisked Boron away on a hovering stretcher. He turned to see another team carefully extracting Jax's cryopod from the ship. "This way," a rebel technician said, gesturing for Philip to follow. "We have specialized rejuvenation chambers for your friend." Philip trailed after them, his palms sweating. The outpost was a maze of twisting corridors carved into the asteroid's heart. They passed countless alien species, all united in their struggle against Rakari oppression. In the medical wing, Philip refused to leave Boron's side. He watched through a viewscreen as rebel surgeons worked tirelessly, using bioregenerative tech beyond anything he'd seen before. Hours blurred together as he waited, every beep and fluctuation on the monitors sending a jolt of fear through him. Philip sagged with relief, tears stinging his eyes. He turned to thank the surgeon, only to find himself face to face with a familiar figure. "Zarek," he breathed, recognizing the seasoned rebel commander from Rakar Prime. The alien's battle-scarred face creased in a grim smile. "Welcome to the Resistance, Philip. We have much to discuss." Zarek led him to a war room deep within the asteroid. Holograms flickered to life, displaying star charts and tactical readouts. A diverse group of alien lieutenants gathered around the central table. "With the dreadnought's firepower and the intel you've brought us," Zarek began, "we finally have a chance to strike at the heart of the Rakari Empire." Philip's fists clenched. "Then let's do it," he snarled. "We should hit their homeworld with everything we've got. Make them pay for every atrocity, every life they've stolen." The room erupted in heated debate. Zarek and several others argued for a more measured approach, targeting military installations to minimize civilian casualties. "We can't sink to their level," one lieutenant insisted. "If we slaughter innocents, we're no better than the Rakari." Philip slammed his hand on the table. "They don't deserve mercy after everything they've done." The single word, spoken with quiet authority, silenced the room. An elder alien stepped forward, his scales bearing a striking resemblance to Boron's. "I am Zoran," he said, fixing Philip with a penetrating gaze. "Boron's father." Philip felt the fight drain out of him as Zoran continued, his voice filled with hard-won wisdom. "I understand your anger, young one. We have all suffered under Rakari cruelty, but perpetuating that cycle of violence will only breed more hatred, more pain. We must be better than our enemies if we hope to build a lasting peace." Philip's shoulders slumped as the truth of Zoran's words sank in. He nodded slowly, his voice barely above a whisper. "You're right. I'm sorry." The group turned their focus to planning precise strikes against Rakari military and economic targets. As they pored over intelligence reports and debated strategies, a commotion outside drew their attention. The door burst open, revealing a haggard but very much alive Jax. The grizzled veteran stumbled into the room, his eyes blazing with purpose. "What'd I miss?" he croaked, a ghost of a smile on his face. Philip rushed to embrace his friend, joy and relief flooding through him. As the rebels brought Jax up to speed, Philip felt a renewed sense of purpose ignite within him. They had a chance, however slim, to end Rakari tyranny once and for all. Philip knew the weight of responsibility that now rested on his shoulders. As he gazed at the holographic display of their first target, a heavily fortified Rakari mining colony, he silently vowed to see this through to the end. The dreadnought's engines roared to life once more, rebel fighters forming up alongside it. As they entered warp, hurtling towards their fateful confrontation, Philip steeled himself for the battles to come. The fate of countless worlds hung in the balance, and he would not let them down. The dreadnought tore out of warp, its massive hull shuddering as it decelerated. Philip gripped the command chair, his eyes fixed on the tactical display. Before them loomed Durgath 5, a fortress of Rakari might. "All squadrons engage," Philip barked into the comms. "Target those defense platforms." A swarm of rebel fighters streaked past the view screen, their engines blazing as they closed on the orbital defenses. The dreadnought's weapons came online with a deep thrum that reverberated through the deck plates. "Firing solution locked," the weapons officer reported. "Bombardment commencing." Philip watched as lances of energy erupted from the dreadnought's forward batteries, striking the planet's surface with devastating precision. Massive plumes of debris erupted from the impact sites, marking the locations of vital extraction facilities. On the ground, Jax and Gron led their teams through the chaos of the assault. Alarms blared as they sprinted through twisting corridors, dodging panicked Rakari workers. "There," Gron shouted, pointing to a heavily reinforced door. "That's got to be the reactor control room." Jax planted breaching charges, while the others took up defensive positions. The explosion rocked the facility, and they surged forward through the smoking hole. Inside, Jax's fingers flew over the alien controls. "Uploading the virus now," he muttered. "Come on, come on." A status bar crawled across the screen. Outside, the sounds of battle grew closer. In the dreadnought's command center, Zoran hunched over a communications terminal. His claws danced across the interface as he input a dizzying series of Rakari command codes. "I'm in," he announced, a fierce grin splitting his scaled face. "Seizing control of orbital batteries, and now—" On the tactical display, Philip watched in awe as the defense platforms began to turn, their weapons now trained on their former masters. The bridge rocked as a Rakari cruiser got off a parting shot before being vaporized by its own defense grid. Philip steadied himself against the console. "Dilithium stockpiles are detonating," an officer called out. "Massive energy spikes across the surface." Philip nodded grimly. "Zarek, you're clear to engage. Don't let a single Rakari ship escape." On the planet below, Jax's team sprinted for the extraction point. The facility shook violently around them as cascading overloads tore through its systems. "We've got company," Gron shouted, opening fire on a squad of black-armored Rakari purgers that rounded the corner. Energy bolts sizzled through the air as Jax dove for cover. He keyed his comm unit. "Philip, we need an exit now." In response, a section of the ceiling vaporized. The dreadnought loomed above, its point defense turrets obliterating the purger positions. "Go, go, go," Jax yelled, urging his team towards the waiting shuttles. As they lifted off, the entire mining complex imploded behind them. A shockwave of unimaginable force rippled outward, shattering what remained of the Rakari presence on Durgath 5. The rebel fleet regrouped, battered but triumphant. Philip input the coordinates for their hidden base, his hands steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. The stars blurred as they tore into slipstream. Philip sagged in his chair, the weight of their victory settling over him. Days later, In the medical bay of their asteroid outpost, Philip stood at Boron's bedside. Her scales were pale, but her eyes shone with pride as she took his hand. Philip nodded, his teeth clenched. This is just the beginning. We won't stop until the Rakari are finished. Boron's grip tightened. Promise me you'll be careful. The stakes are only going to get higher from here. I promise, Philip said, meeting her gaze. We're in this together, all of us, and we're going to win. All right, Philip said, studying the shimmering projection of a massive Rakari shipyard. Let's plan our next move. The rebel fleet dropped out of Slipstream, the stolen Ektra dreadnought at its head. Philip's hands flew across the alien controls, his eyes fixed on the looming shipyards of Kalok Prime. All ships, battle stations, he ordered, his voice steady despite the hammering of his heart. Zarek, launch fighters. Gron, power up main cannons. The vast construction docks stretched before them, skeletal frames of half-built warships suspended in the void. Philip watched as swarms of rebel fighters peeled away from the fleet, streaking towards the Rakari defensive line. Incoming, Gron shouted. Rakari cruisers bearing 035. Energy beams lanced out from the enemy vessels, sizzling past the dreadnought's hull. Philip jerked the controls, the massive ship groaning as it banked hard to port. Return fire, he commanded. Target their forward shields. The dreadnought's cannons roared to life, hurling plasma bolts that smashed into the lead Rakari cruiser. Its shields flickered and died, leaving it vulnerable to the rebel fighters that swarmed around it like angry insects. On the command deck's main view screen, Philip watched Jax's dropship weave through the chaos, heading for the central reactor complex. The grizzled veteran's voice crackled over the comms. We're going in hot, Jax reported. Lots of Purger activity around the main entrance. Could use some cover fire. Philip nodded to his weapons officer. You heard them, man. Clear them a path. The dreadnought's point defense turrets opened up, stitching lines of superheated death across the reactor complex's exterior. Purger troops scattered, their black armor offering little protection against the barrage. Jax's team hit the ground running, energy weapons blazing as they fought their way inside. Philip forced himself to look away, trusting his old friend to complete the mission. New contact, Gron bellowed. It's big, sir, really big. Philip's blood ran cold as he saw it, a massive Rakari battlecruiser, easily twice the size of the dreadnought. Even unfinished, its weapons blazed with terrifying power. Sir, that thing will rip us apart, Gron said, his voice tight with fear. We need to take it out now. Philip's mind raced, seeking a solution. Then he saw it, a flickering weakness in the battlecruiser's shields right above its exposed reactor core. There, he said, pointing to the tactical display. Gron, charge the main plasma cannon. We're only going to get one shot at this. The dreadnought shuddered as it banked hard, lining up for the killing blow. Alarms blared as the battlecruiser's weapons found their mark, tearing into the rebel ship's armor. Philip took a deep breath, his finger hovering over the firing control. Fire. A lance of pure energy erupted from the dreadnought's prow, striking the battlecruiser's vulnerable point with pinpoint accuracy. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the massive ship's reactor went critical. A blinding flash seared Philip's eyes as the battlecruiser tore itself apart, the blast wave smashing into nearby construction gantries. Before Philip could celebrate, Jax's voice cut through the comms chatter. We've got a problem down here. Purger counterattack has us pinned down in the control room, working on the overload, but we need an exit strategy. Philip's mind raced. Hang tight, Jax, we're coming for you. He turned to his bridge crew. Prep a strike team for immediate deployment. We're going in after them. As Philip moved to join the rescue operation, a new threat appeared on the tactical display. His heart sank as he saw the massive Purger fleet dropping out of Slipstream. Sir, his communications officer said, her voice quavering, we're receiving a transmission from the Purger flagship. It's Supreme Executor Sarak himself. Philip's fists clenched as the Rakari High Lord's face filled the view screen, its alien features twisted with cold fury. Rebel vermin, Sarak hissed. Your pitiful insurrection ends here. Surrender now, and I may grant you the mercy of a swift execution." Philip's response was to cut the transmission. He keyed the fleet-wide comms. "All ships prepare for emergency jump to pre-calculated coordinates. Zarek, get your fighters back on board. We're leaving." He turned to his helm officer. "Set all engines to critical burn. We need to buy time for the rest of the fleet to escape." The dreadnought's massive engines flared to life, pushing it to its structural limits as it moved to cover the retreating rebel ships. Philip watched the tactical display, counting down the agonizing seconds until Jax's team was safely extracted. "We're clear," Jax's voice finally came through. "Get us out of here." Philip didn't need to be told twice. "All ships, jump now!" The stars blurred as the battered rebel fleet tore into slipstream, leaving behind the ruined shipyards of Kalok Prime. They had struck a critical blow against the Rakari war machine, but at a terrible cost. As the adrenaline faded, Philip sagged in his command chair. They had won the battle, but he knew the real war was just beginning. Somewhere out there, Supreme Executor Sarak was already plotting his revenge, and the Rakari homeworld, their final, most dangerous target, still lay ahead. Philip closed his eyes, allowing himself a moment of exhaustion before the next crisis demanded his attention. Whatever came next, he knew one thing for certain: there would be no rest until the Rakari Empire was brought to its knees. The stolen Ektra dreadnought tore out of slipstream, its hull scorched and systems sputtering. Philip gripped the command chair as the ship shuddered violently. "Status report," he barked. Gron's fingers danced across his console. "Main reactor at 18% capacity. Weapons systems offline, hull breaches on decks 3 through 7. Philip surveyed the tactical display. The rebel fleet limped into formation around them, a patchwork of battered ships trailing debris. "Get me engineering," Philip ordered. "We need those systems back online now." The view screen flickered to life, revealing a smoke-filled engine room. Chief Engineer Kara wiped soot from her face. "We're working on it, sir, but I've got coolant leaks and fried power couplings everywhere. It'll take hours, maybe days." As repair crews swarmed over the dreadnought's hull, Philip made his way to the war room. Zarek and the other rebel commanders were already gathered around the holotable. Admiral Vex, a grizzled Centaurian veteran, pulled up a star chart. "We hit them hard. Production facilities on Kalok Prime, Zeta 9 and Rigel 4 are toast. Conservative estimates put Rakari shipbuilding capacity down by 70%. A chorus of grim nods circled the table. Philip studied the faces of his comrades, noting the mix of exhaustion and fierce pride. "And our losses?" he pressed. Zarek's mandibles clicked softly. "Nearly a third of our fighter corps. The Talon and the Defiant didn't make it out." Philip's chest tightened as he thought of the crews lost. Before he could respond, alarms blared through the war room. Zoran burst through the doors, his scales flushed with agitation. "We've got incoming transmissions," the Rakari rebel snarled. "It's bad." The holotable flickered, displaying a series of encoded messages. Philip watched in horror as the true scope of their predicament became clear. "Sarek's unleashing everything he's got," Zoran explained. "Purger strike teams are hitting our safe worlds. They're using neural scramblers on our people, cracking open their minds like eggs." The room erupted in a cacophony of voices. Philip raised his hand, silencing the outburst. "Options?" Silence fell, broken only by the hum of the holotable. Then Zoran stepped forward, his eyes blazing. "We hit them where it hurts," he growled. "Sekhar, the homeworld." Gasps and mutters rippled through the assembled commanders. Admiral Vex smacked his palm on the table. "That's suicide. Their orbital defenses alone would shred us before we got close." Zoran bared his teeth. "It's our only shot. If we don't take out their command and control, we're finished." The debate raged, voices rising as strategies were proposed and shot down. Philip stood silent, weighing the impossible choices before him. "Enough," he said finally. All eyes turned to him. "Zoran's right. We go for Sekhar." As the others filed out to prepare, Jax pulled Philip aside. The grizzled veteran's face was grave. "There's something you need to know about Boron." Philip listened in stunned silence as Jax revealed what he'd discovered. The implications were staggering. "Are you certain?" Philip asked, his mind turning. Jax nodded. "Ran the tests myself. She's Ectra through and through, the embodiment we've been waiting for." Before Philip could process this revelation, a familiar voice spoke behind him. "So now you know." He turned to see Boron, her eyes shimmering with a mix of fear and persistence. She stepped forward, taking his hand. "I heard everything," she said softly. "I always knew I was different, but this—" She trailed off, looking at the star chart displaying their perilous course to Sekar. Philip squeezed her hand. "We don't have to do this. It's too dangerous." Boron shook her head, a fierce light in her eyes. "No, this is why I'm here, why we're all here, to end this once and for all." As the dreadnought system slowly came back online, the rebel fleet dispersed. Prowlers and stealth craft slipped away, seeding the path to Sekar with sensor drones and targeting beacons. On the bridge, Philip stood at the helm. Boron was beside him, her presence a beacon of hope. Zarek, Jax, and Zoran took their stations, each lost in their own thoughts as the moment of truth approached. "All ships report ready," Gron announced. Philip took a deep breath, his hand hovering over the jump controls. This is it. No turning back now. Philip nodded, tenacity hardening his features. Together. With a single command, reality fractured around them. The rebel armada hurtled into the void, bound for the heart of the Rakari Empire and the battle that would decide the destiny of the universe. The rebel armada tore out of warp, the stars blurring back into focus as they approached Sekar. Philip's eyes widened at the sight of the Rakari homeworld, its surface a patchwork of sprawling cities and fortified military complexes. Before the words left his mouth, space lit up with weapons fire. Supreme Executor Sarek's Purger fleet swarmed toward them, sleek warships jam-packed with deadly armaments. The dreadnought's deck shuddered as its main cannons roared to life. Massive plasma bolts streaked across the void, slamming into Sarek's flagship. The enemy vessel's shields flared brilliantly, but held. "Direct hit," Gron shouted. "Their forward shields are down to 60%. Philip's reply was cut short as Sarek's ship returned fire. A barrage of energy beams lanced out, carving deep gashes in the dreadnought's hull. Klaxons wailed as damage reports flooded in. "Hull breach on Deck 4, an officer called out. "Sealing emergency bulkheads." As the two Titans traded devastating blows, Jax's voice crackled over the comms. "We're approaching the orbital platforms, commencing infiltration." Philip watched on the tactical display as a cluster of stealthed rebel shuttles slipped past the Rakari's outer defenses. Jax and Gron led their team into the heart of Sekar's orbital fortifications. Inside the nearest platform, Jax's boots clanged on metal grating as they raced through dimly lit corridors. They encountered minimal resistance, the Rakari's attention focused on the massive space battle raging outside. Jax nodded, pulling out a data spike loaded with stolen Rakari security codes. He jammed it into the access panel, holding his breath as lines of alien text scrolled across the screen. The door hissed open. Inside, startled Rakari technicians reached for weapons, but Jax's team was faster. Stun bolts dropped the defenders before they could raise the alarm. "Gron, get to work," Jax ordered, covering the door. The burly alien's fingers flew across the control consoles. One by one, the platform's weapon systems and shield generators winked offline. "It's done," Gron announced. "The others are reporting success. We've opened a hole in their defenses." Back on the dreadnought, Philip saw his chance. "All ships, push through. Zarek, launch your fighters. Hit that planetary garrison hard." The rebel fleet surged forward, pouring through the gap in Sekar's orbital screen. Zarek's squadrons streaked ahead, atmospheric friction turning their hulls cherry red as they dove toward the planet's surface. On the gun decks, Boron stood before a sea of alien weapon controls. Her eyes glowed with an inner light as her Ectra biocode interfaced directly with the ship's systems. Under her guidance, the dreadnought's batteries spoke with terrifying accuracy. Hardened Rakari bunkers, designed to withstand conventional bombardment, crumbled under the precision strikes. Philip watched in awe as defensive emplacements that had stood for centuries were reduced to rubble in moments. "Keep it up," he urged. "We need to—" His words died in his throat as the tactical display erupted with new contacts. Swarms of Purger constructs poured from concealed hangars, their cybernetic forms dripping with deadly weaponry. "Incoming," Zoran shouted. "All ships, brace for impact." The cyborg horrors slammed into the rebel lines. Laser fire and plasma bolts crisscrossed space as the two forces collided in a maelstrom of destruction. On the planet's surface, rebel marines engaged in brutal street-to-street combat. Energy weapons flashed in the rubble-strewn boulevards of Sekhar's capital as flesh and metal clashed. Amidst the chaos, Jax's covert team pushed deeper into the heart of the military district. They followed whispered rumors and fragments of intel, searching for their ultimate prize. "There," one of Jax's soldiers called out, gesturing to a nondescript building. "Energy readings are off the charts. Has to be the vault." As they approached, a squad of Purger Guardians materialized from cloaked positions. The elite Rakari warriors opened fire, their weapons carving chunks from the nearby buildings. Jax dove for cover, his team scattering. "We need backup," he shouted into his comm. "Sending coordinates now. The seed is here, but we're pinned down." Philip received the transmission, his mind racing. They needed a solution fast. "Prep the neutron vortex," he ordered. "We're going to give Jax the window he needs." The dreadnought's experimental weapon powered up, drawing energy from the ship's straining reactors. A shimmering distortion enveloped the military district, warping the very fabric of space-time. Inside the null field, the Purger Guardians faltered. Their augmented senses overwhelmed, they staggered blindly as Jax's team sprinted for the vault entrance. "We're in," Jax reported, "but we need extraction now." As havoc engulfed Sekhar, Zoran coordinated the rebel fleet. Strike craft and capital ships alike fought to hold their position, maintaining a punishing bombardment on the Rakari regime's strongholds. Boron's preternatural aim crippled the planet's hypercom arrays, leaving the defenders cut off from potential reinforcements, but the rebels paid a heavy price for each gain. Without warning, Sarak's flagship unleashed its most devastating weapon. A stream of antimatter lanced out, catching the dreadnought amidships. The bridge erupted in flames and debris. Philip was thrown from his chair, his ears ringing. Through the smoke he saw Zoran slumped over his console, dark blood pooling beneath him. Philip crawled to his friend's side. Zoran's eyes flickered open, filled with pain and fierce defiance. "The seed?" Zoran gasped, clutching Philip's arm. "Get it, end this!" With a final rattling breath, Zoran went still. Philip rose unsteadily to his feet, surveying the devastation around him. The dreadnought was dying, its mighty hull torn open to the vacuum of space. As escape pods jettisoned from the failing dreadnought, Philip turned his attention to one last bold strategy. He raced for the auxiliary craft bay, determined to rescue Jax and secure humanity's last hope. Behind him, Sekhar burned. The future of the stars hung in the balance as Philip launched into the... Philip's hands gripped the auxiliary craft's controls, his fingers tightening as he wove through a storm of Rakari fire. The shuttle bucked and shuddered, alarms blaring as energy bolts seared past the viewport. "Hang on," he shouted, banking hard to avoid a cluster of incoming missiles. Boron's voice rang out from the weapons station. "Guardian emplacement at 2 o'clock." Her fingers danced across the targeting interface. A burst of concentrated energy lanced out, obliterating the Purger position in a fiery explosion. On the ground, Jax and his team huddled behind the crumbling remains of the vault's outer wall. Plasma rounds hissed overhead, melting chunks of debris. "There's our ride," Gron growled, pointing to Philip's descending craft. "Move!" The rebels sprinted across open ground, zigzagging to avoid enemy fire. Jax clutched a metallic cylinder to his chest, the progenitor seed, humming with alien power. Philip brought the shuttle in low, kicking up clouds of dust and ash. The loading ramp dropped, revealing Boron laying down covering fire. One by one, the battered rebels clambered aboard. Jax was last, diving through the hatch as a volley of energy bolts peppered the hull. Philip yanked back on the controls, the engines screaming as they fought Sekhar's gravity. Suddenly, the craft lurched violently. A deafening boom echoed through the cabin as alarms shrieked to life. "Starboard thrusters are gone!" Philip shouted, fighting to keep them airborne. "Diverting all power to emergency ascent." The shuttle climbed in fits and starts, trailing smoke and debris. Outside, Rakari hunter-killers swarmed like angry insects, peppering them with laser fire. Boron's hands flew across the weapons console, returning fire with deadly accuracy. "We're not going to make it through their defensive grid." Philip's mind raced. He glanced at the ordnance readouts, then at the looming barrier of Rakari warships above. A desperate plan formed. "Rig the remaining missiles for simultaneous detonation," he ordered. "We're going to punch a hole." As Boron worked, Philip pushed the crippled shuttle to its limits. They corkscrewed through curtains of plasma fire, hull plating disintegrating under the assault. "Ready," Boron called out. Philip took a deep breath. "Fire!" A spread of missiles erupted from the shuttle's launchers. Seconds later, they detonated in a blinding flash. The makeshift nuclear pulse sent a shockwave rippling through space, scattering Rakari ships like leaves in a gale. Riding the wave of destruction, the rebel craft burst into low orbit. Philip's eyes scanned frantically for friendly signals. With the last dregs of power, Philip guided them into the flagship's waiting docking bay. The moment they touched down, Zarek's voice crackled over the comms. "Cutting it close," the alien commander said. "Initiating jump now. Hold on to something." Reality twisted as the rebel fleet plunged into slipstream. In the cargo hold, Jack sagged against a bulkhead, still clutching the seed. Gron tended to the wounded, his scaled face grim. Philip found Boron amid the chaos, pulling her close. They clung to each other as the ship shuddered around them. "We did it," Boron whispered. Philip nodded, but his eyes were distant. The price of victory deeply affected on his soul. So many lost. The dreadnought, Zoran. As the vast emptiness of slip space enveloped them, Philip made a silent vow. They would use the seed to end this war, to bring down the Rakari Empire once and for all, whatever it took. Philip's hands trembled as he examined the holographic readouts of the progenitor seed. Its inner workings pulsed with an otherworldly glow, revealing layer upon layer of impossibly complex energy matrices. Boron stood beside him, her eyes closed in deep concentration. Tendrils of light danced across her skin as her Ectra biocode interfaced directly with the artifact. "It's incredible," she whispered. "The power contained within it defies comprehension." As the data streams flowed, the true nature of the seed became clear. Philip's eyes widened in awe and horror. "This isn't just a weapon," he breathed. "It's a key to rewriting reality itself." Jax leaned in, his face grim. The legends were true. This is what the Ectra used to end their final war. Entire star systems wiped from existence in an instant. The implications struck Philip like a physical blow. With this, they could annihilate the Rakari Empire in the blink of an eye. But at what cost? Word of the seed's capabilities spread through the rebel fleet like wildfire. In the command center, voices rose in heated debate. Zarek banged his head on the table. "We cannot use this abomination. To do so would make us no better than the monsters we fight." Gron snarled, baring his fangs. "The Rakari have slaughtered billions. They deserve no mercy." He laid out his plan to seek out rumored Rakari defectors. It was risky, but their options were dwindling. Hours later, a small stealth craft slipped away from the rebel fleet. Philip, Boron, Jax, and Gron huddled in its cramped interior as they followed encrypted coordinates deep into an uncharted nebula. "Hold on," Philip warned, engaging evasive maneuvers. The little ship bucked and rolled as it wove through a hail of weapons fire. Alarms blared as their shields took hit after hit. Just when it seemed they would be torn apart, a transmission crackled through the static. Unidentified vessel. State your purpose or be destroyed. Philip took a deep breath. We come seeking allies against Sarak's tyranny. We bring proof of a weapon that could end this war. Proceed to Landing Bay 3. Any hostile action will result in immediate termination. They touched down in a cavernous hangar. As the boarding ramp lowered, Philip found himself staring down the barrels of a dozen particle rifles held by grim-faced Rakari. One stepped forward, his scarred face a map of old battles. I am Vorax, leader of this enclave. Speak quickly, alien. Why should we not kill you where you stand? Philip met his gaze steadily. Because we share a common enemy, and we may have found a way to stop Sarak once and for all. Before Vorax could reply, shouts erupted from the assembled Rakari. Some raised their weapons, while others moved to stand protectively near the newcomers. Lies, one faction leader bellowed. They seek to trick us into betraying our people. Another countered, Sarak is the betrayer. How many more must die for his mad crusade? In a heartbeat, the hangar erupted into chaos. Energy bolts sizzled through the air as former comrades turned on each other. Philip and his team dove for cover behind a stack of supply crates. Jax returned fire with practiced precision, dropping several attackers. Gron roared in battle fury, charging into the fray with fists flying, but they were hopelessly outnumbered. Boron! Philip shouted over the din. Use the seed! She nodded grimly, pulling the artifact from its containment field. As she activated it, waves of coruscating energy pulsed outward. The fighting Rakari stumbled, their augmented senses overloaded by the seed's power. Weapons clattered to the floor as they clutched their heads in agony. In the sudden silence, Philip stood. Enough, we didn't come here to fight. We came for information that could save countless lives, including your own. Vorax struggled to his feet, his eyes narrowing. What do you mean? Sarak has initiated the purification protocols, Jax explained. He's cleansing entire worlds. How long before he decides this enclave is a threat that must be eliminated? A murmur of fear rippled through the assembled Rakari. Vorax's shoulders sagged as the fight drained out of him. Over the next several hours, Philip and his team pored over intelligence reports and strategic assessments. The picture that emerged was grim. It's worse than we feared, Philip said, his voice heavy. Sarak isn't just targeting rebel strongholds. He's systematically exterminating any world he deems contaminated by outside influence. Jax nodded grimly. Entire civilizations are being wiped out. We're talking billions of lives. Philip's mind raced. They needed to act, and fast. But using the seed carried its own terrifying risks. There's one option left, he said finally. We take the seed to this world. He indicated a planet deep in Rakari space. It's a major military hub. If we can strike there, we might be able to cripple Sarak's war machine. Jax's face paled. Philip, wait. That world, according to these records, it's become a refuge. Millions of dissidents and political exiles have fled there to escape Sarak's purges. The implications hit Philip like a physical blow. If they used the seed, they would be condemning those innocent lives to oblivion. We need to decide, Philip said quietly, and we need to decide now. Philip's decision crystallized. They needed to act, and fast. He turned to his team, his voice steady despite the weight of their task. We infiltrate Kirak. It's our best shot at stopping Sarak's madness. Days later, Philip gripped the controls of a battered freighter, its hull scarred and pitted. Boron sat beside him, her fingers dancing across the nav console. In the cargo hold, Jax and Gron huddled among crates of salvaged tech, their weapons hidden beneath layers of scrap. As they approached Kirak's orbital checkpoints, Philip's pulse quickened. A harsh voice crackled over the comms. Unidentified vessel, state your purpose. Philip leaned into the mic, adopting a gruff accent. Just some honest traders looking to offload surplus goods. Got a manifest if you need it. 10 seconds passed, then proceed to Docking Bay 7. As they neared Kerak's atmosphere, proximity alarms shrieked to life. 3 Rakari warships materialized from stealth, weapons primed. "Trader vessel, power down immediately. Prepare for boarding." Philip's mind raced. He locked eyes with Boron, who nodded grimly. Philip slammed the controls, sending the freighter into a wild spin. His fingers flew across the console, jettisoning cargo modules in rapid succession. The modules exploded outward, creating a debris field that momentarily confused the Rakari targeting systems. Plasma bolts seared past the viewport as Philip pushed the engines beyond their limits. Warning lights flashed across every display. "We're losing structural integrity," Boron shouted over the din. The freighter shuddered violently as they entered Kerak's upper atmosphere. Philip fought to maintain control as they plummeted toward the planet's surface. "Everybody hold on." The world outside became a blur of fire and twisted metal. With a bone-jarring impact, they slammed into the ground, skidding to a halt in a desolate wilderness. Smoke filled the cabin as they stumbled from the wreckage. Philip helped Boron to her feet, while Jax and Gron emerged from the ruins of the cargo hold. "Everyone okay?" Philip asked, scanning the horizon for signs of pursuit. Gron spat blood, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. "I've had worse landings." They gathered what supplies they could salvage and set off across the barren landscape. For days they trekked through harsh terrain, rationing their dwindling resources. Finally, they crested a ridge and saw it, a sprawling settlement nestled in a valley below. As they approached, Philip noticed the mix of human and alien architecture. A group of armed individuals emerged to meet them. Philip raised his hands slowly. "We come seeking allies against Sarak," he said. "We have information that could turn the tide of this war." The leader, a grizzled human woman, studied them intently. "Follow me, but know that if you're lying, you won't leave this place alive." Inside a makeshift command center, Philip laid out their mission. To his surprise, several Rakari were present, their uniforms marking them as high-ranking officials. One stepped forward, his mandibles clicking. "We've been waiting for an opportunity like this. Sarak's purges have gone too far. If you truly have a way to stop him, we'll do whatever it takes." Philip nodded, hope kindling in his chest. "We have a plan, but it won't be easy." Over the next hours, they pored over maps and schematics. The Rakari defectors provided crucial intelligence on the capital's defenses. "The induction spire is our best shot," Philip explained. "If we can get the seed to its core, we might be able to shield the entire planet." As night fell, final preparations were made. Philip found Boron staring at the stars, her expression troubled. Philip took her hand. "I know, but it's our only choice." Dawn broke as they made their way through the city's underground tunnels. Jax and Gron peeled off with a team of rebels, ready to create a diversion. Philip and Boron emerged into the bowels of the induction spire. Alarms blared in the distance. The diversion was working. They fought their way through layers of security, Boron's hacking skills proving invaluable. Finally, they reached the reinforced bunker housing the spire's control systems. Philip's hands shook as he removed the seed from its containment field. It pulsed with otherworldly energy, filling the room with an eerie glow. Boron's fingers flew across the control panels, interfacing the seed with Kerak's geothermal network. "Ready," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Philip took a deep breath and activated the seed. The air itself seemed to vibrate as waves of energy poured forth. Suddenly the bunker door exploded inward. Elite Purger Guardians stormed in, weapons blazing. She slammed her palm onto the activation sequence. The world around them warped and twisted. Reality itself seemed to tear apart. When Philip's vision cleared, he found himself floating in a sea of swirling colors. Kerak hung before him like a jewel suspended in the void. Boron's voice came through his comms, filled with awe. "It worked. We're in subspace. Kerak is safe." As the realization sank in, Philip felt a mix of triumph and uncertainty. They had won a crucial victory, but cut off from the rest of the galaxy, their real fight was just beginning. The swirling colors of subspace faded, revealing the harsh reality of their situation. Philip blinked, his eyes adjusting to the dim light of the underground bunker. The air buzzed with an otherworldly energy. The progenitor seed's displacement field, permeating every molecule. Boron's fingers danced across a jury-rigged control panel, her brow furrowed in concentration. Field harmonics stabilizing, but we're not out of danger yet. A Rakari scientist, one of the defectors, approached, mandibles clicking nervously. The quantum barrier matrices are holding but barely. We need to reinforce the anchor points. Philip nodded, turning to Jax. How are our defenses? Kriltha, Jax spat, grabbing his weapon. They're inside. Philip's mind raced. Jax, Gron, take a squad and hold them back. We can't let them reach the seed. The two warriors sprinted out, rallying militia fighters as they went. The sounds of battle soon echoed through the corridors, plasma fire and the screech of tearing metal. In the control room, Philip and Boron worked frantically. A swarm of silvery motes seeped through an air vent, viral nanovectors unleashed by the Krilthar. "Philip!" Boron shouted, backing away from the lethal cloud. He acted on instinct, slamming his palm onto a control panel. A burst of blue-white energy pulsed outward, the recursive ions breaking down the nanovector's molecular structure. Outside, the situation worsened. The bunker shook violently, dust raining from the ceiling. "Sarak's fleet," the Rakari scientist hissed. "They're bombarding us with antimatter warheads." Philip's face hardened. They couldn't stay here. "We need to evacuate now." For hours they worked tirelessly. Philip coordinated with Gron and Jax, clearing paths for the endless stream of terrified refugees. Boron and her team prepared the geothermal shelters, transforming ancient caverns into a haven for millions. Philip stood at the entrance to the final shelter, ushering the last stragglers inside. The ground quaked beneath his feet, Sarek's assault growing more intense by the second. "That's it," Jack shouted, sprinting toward him. "Everyone's in." A blinding flash lit up the sky. Philip's blood ran cold as he realized what it meant. The shields had failed. Antimatter fire was breaching the planet's crust. "Seal it!" he roared, diving through the blast doors. In the control center of their new sanctuary, Boron activated the stasis protocols. One by one, cryocells hummed to life, preserving the lives of millions in frigid slumber. Philip watched the monitors as Kirak's surface vanished in a maelstrom of fire and destruction. Yet here, deep beneath the planet's mantle, protected by layer upon layer of exotic energy fields, hope survived. "We've survived," Philip said, his voice steady despite the weight of all they'd endured. "And we will fight on. Sarek thinks he's won, but he's only given us time to prepare. When the seed recharges, we'll strike back, and we'll keep fighting until the galaxy is free." The others nodded, a fire kindling in their eyes despite their weariness. Outside their quantum refuge, Kirak burned. But within, the seeds of rebellion took root, waiting for the day they would bloom and change the fate of worlds. The geothermal sanctuary beneath Kirak's ravaged surface hummed with activity. Philip stood in the bustling control center, watching as refugees emerged from cryostasis pods, their eyes wide with confusion and fear. Technicians scurried about, calibrating life support systems and tending to the weakened survivors. "How are we looking, Boron?" Philip asked, turning to his trusted companion. Boron's fingers danced across a holographic display, her brow furrowed in concentration. "The sanctuary's integrity is holding, but we're not out of the woods yet. The seed's energy levels are critically low." Philip nodded grimly. They needed a new plan, and fast. As if reading his thoughts, Boron's eyes lit up. "Philip, I've found something. Come look at this." He leaned in, studying the complex astrocartographic data scrolling across the screen. Boron pointed to a faint energy signature pulsing in an uncharted sector. "It's an Ektra shipyard," she explained, excitement creeping into her voice. "If we can reach it, we might find a replacement for our lost capital ship." Philip's mind raced with possibilities. A new dreadnought could turn the tide of this war. "Jax," he called out, "gather our best. We're going on a scouting mission." Hours later, Philip and Jax led a small team through shimmering quantum rifts. The auxiliary displacement corridors twisted reality around them, warping space and time. "Stay alert," Philip warned as they navigated the treacherous subspace strata. "One wrong step could scatter us across 1,000 dimensions." They emerged into a maelstrom of cosmic energy. Twin suns blazed nearby, their radiation creating a hellish haze. Antimatter storms raged in the distance, reality itself seeming to tear apart at the seams. "There!" Jack shouted, pointing to a massive structure barely visible through the chaos. The derelict shipyard loomed before them, a titanic relic of a long-dead civilization. Shattered Ectra warships and twisted bulkheads formed a deadly obstacle course as they approached. Philip's team boarded the ancient station, their footsteps echoing through cavernous halls. In the central nexus, faint power signatures flickered to life. "Gron," Philip said into his comm, "we need that reactor online. Think you can handle it?" A gruff chuckle came through the static. "Just point me at it, boss." Philip watched tensely as Gron's team rigged thermal capacitors to the ancient power systems. With a thunderous roar, fusion lances ignited and beam forges hummed to life. The shipyard shuddered, awakening from its long slumber. Philip made his way to the main construction dock, his breath catching at the sight before him. He deployed swarms of exo-rig construction mechs, their welding arcs blazing as they began completing the warship's outer hull. Meanwhile, Boron worked feverishly to integrate the progenitor seed into the ship's quantum drive. Suddenly, alarms blared throughout the station. Philip's blood ran cold as he saw the cause. A massive purger fleet had entered the system. "So they found us," Jack shouted, sprinting to a weapons station. Philip took command, his voice steady despite the chaos. "All hands to battle stations. Gron, Jax, take your teams and hold them off. We need more time." The shipyard's ancient weapons roared to life. Devastator cannons unleashed searing beams of energy, while cyclonic torpedoes spiraled towards the incoming purger ships. The void erupted in fire and fury as the two forces clashed. Gron and Jax led daring strikes against purger boarding parties, fighting tooth and nail through the shipyard's twisting corridors. In the heart of the dreadnought, Boron worked with manic intensity. Sweat beaded on her forehead as she integrated the seed's alien technology with the warship's systems. "How much longer?" Philip yelled over the din of battle. He nodded, understanding the implications. With the seed's power harnessed by the dreadnought, they could turn the tide against Sarek once and for all. But as purger reinforcements poured through the subspace breach, Philip knew their window of opportunity was rapidly closing. The hope of the universe hung in the balance, and time was running out. The shipyard shuddered as another wave of purger reinforcements poured through the subspace breach. Philip gripped the command console, his squeezing hard as he watched the tactical display. Red icons swarmed across the holographic battlefield, closing in on their position. "Jack's status report," Philip barked into the comm. Static crackled before Jax's voice cut through. "We're holding the line, but barely. These purger bastards just keep coming." Through the viewport, Philip watched as Jax's fighters danced between streams of antimatter fire. The void lit up with brilliant flashes as ships on both sides were vaporized in an instant. "Boron, how much longer?" Philip called out, his eyes never leaving the battle raging outside. Boron's fingers flew across her workstation, sweat beading on her forehead. "The integration's at 70%, but the quantum matrices are becoming unstable. I need more time." Philip nodded grimly. He keyed in a series of commands, bringing the shipyard's ancient defenses online. Massive cyclonic torpedo arrays swiveled into position, their targeting systems locking onto the advancing Rakari capital ships. The shipyard trembled as waves of hellfire erupted from its weapons. Purger ships vanished in blinding explosions, but more took their place. Philip watched in dismay as large sections of the perimeter defenses flickered and died, overwhelmed by the enemy's subspace distortion fields. Alarms blared throughout the station. "Containment failure in sectors 7 through 12, an automated voice announced. "Purger boarding parties detected." Philip smacked his palm on the comm panel. Gron, we need those reactor substations secured. On it, boss, Gron's gruff voice replied. I've got every civilian who can hold a weapon. We'll hold them off or die trying. The sounds of close-quarters combat echoed through the shipyard's corridors. Plasma bolts sizzled through the air as Gron's hastily assembled militia clashed with Purger boarding lances. The acrid smell of burning metal and flesh filled the air as the battle raged from room to room, deck by deck. In the heart of the dreadnought, Boron worked frantically to complete the seed's integration. Warning klaxons blared as exotic energies surged through the ship's systems. Philip, we have a problem, Boron shouted. The quantum matrices are destabilizing. If we don't do something fast, we're looking at a catastrophic cascade overload. Philip's mind raced. They were out of options, out of time. He made a snap decision. Initiating Emergency Protocol Omega, he announced, his fingers flying across the command interface. Redirecting all available power to the shipyard's repair drones. The drones swarmed into action, constructing a massive warp displacement field around the entire shipyard superstructure. Energy crackled and arced between the drones as they wove an intricate web of subspace distortions. Suddenly, the shipyard's systems went haywire. Red warning lights flashed across every console. Before anyone could answer, massive bulkheads slammed shut throughout the station. Ancient machinery groaned to life, awakening from millennia of slumber. Philip's blood ran cold as he saw what appeared on the security feeds. Colossal automata. Their forms, twisted and alien, rose from hidden chambers. The Ectra Sentinels had been reactivated, and they had one purpose: to purge all life from the shipyard. Everyone fall back to the quantum displacement chamber, Philip shouted into the station-wide comm. This is not a drill. All personnel evacuate immediately. Chaos erupted as rebels and civilians alike scrambled for safety. The Sentinels advanced relentlessly, their weapons cutting down everything in their path, rebel and purger alike. Philip sprinted through the corridors, helping stragglers and urging everyone towards the displacement chamber. The dreadnought loomed before them, their last hope of escape. The final bulkhead began to close. Philip dove through the narrowing gap, rolling to his feet as the massive doors slammed shut. The entire chamber shuddered as something massive impacted the other side. Now, Boron, Philip roared. Boron slammed her hand down on the activation panel. Reality itself seemed to twist and warp around them. There was a blinding flash, a sensation of falling through infinity, and then the blinding flash faded, and Philip found himself suspended in an otherworldly void. Fractals of light danced across the emptiness, a kaleidoscope of impossible colors shifting and warping around him. He blinked, his senses struggling to process the alien environment. "Boron, status report," he called out, his voice echoing strangely in the hyperspatial limbo. Boron's fingers flew across holographic displays that flickered in and out of existence. "The quantum drive matrices are unstable. We need to integrate the seed now, or we'll be trapped here forever." Philip nodded, turning to the rebel techs. "Reconfigure those power conduits. We need every ounce of energy we can muster." As the crew worked feverishly, Boron closed her eyes, interfacing directly with the ship's systems. Her biomechanical implants pulsed with an eerie blue light as she attuned herself to the seed's exotic energies. A low rumble reverberated through the void. Philip's blood ran cold as he saw massive shapes stirring in the distance. "Ectra Mega Sentinels," he breathed. "They've detected us." Jax and Gron sprang into action, corralling civilians and distributing what little weaponry remained from their harrowing escape. Philip watched as the colossal automata lumbered towards them, their ancient forms filled with weaponry that defied comprehension. "Jax, set up a perimeter," Philip ordered. "Gron, I need you on damage control." A Harbinger Mega-Sentinel materialized before them, its form seeming to bend the very fabric of reality around it. Philip's hands shook as he accessed the Ectra archives, desperately searching for a deactivation code. "Galarian Override Alpha 79 Epsilon," he shouted. his voice cracking with desperation. The Mega Sentinel's eyes flared red. A mechanized voice boomed across the void. "Contaminant detected, initiating extinction protocols." "Shields up!" Philip roared as the automaton unleashed a devastating barrage of energy. Boron cried out in pain, her neural link to the ship straining under the assault. "I'm redirecting all power to the seed's integration," she gasped. "We don't have much time." The air crackled with ozone as a massive dimensional fracture tore open, swallowing the Mega Sentinel whole. But more were coming. Philip made the hardest decision of his life. "Purge the displacement drive," he ordered, his voice heavy. "We're going to use the seed to create a hyper-geometrical shock point." Jax and Gron protested vehemently, but Philip silenced them with a look. "Get Boron out of that neural link and evacuate everyone through the fracture. That's an order." As the last of the survivors were pulled to safety, Philip stood alone on the bridge. Alarms blared as life support failed around him. With trembling hands, he input the final commands, overloading the navigation core and channeling all the ship's anti-energies into the progenitor seed. "Philip, please," Boron's voice crackled over the comm. "There's still time." The seed pulsed with impossible power. Reality itself seemed to scream as dimensional walls shattered. Philip felt his very atoms being torn apart, scattered across countless realities in a cosmic rebirth. In the infinite silence that followed, only the faintest whisper of consciousness remained, the last remnant of the man who had given everything to save a galaxy that would never know his name. If you finished this story, please subscribe and like the video. Then leave a comment that says, "I liked the story," and I will heart every single one of them. It really helps me. Thank you for your time.